Standing together at a scenic overlook as dusk settled over the city, the young woman admired the vibrant sky and urged her companion to look, to which he softly agreed. Turning toward him with a look of nervous anticipation, she confessed that she had visited a doctor earlier that day to share a meaningful revelation. Resting her hands gently over her stomach, she announced with quiet joy that she was carrying his child. Overwhelmed by the news, he pulled her into a tight, emotional embrace beneath the open sky. In the years that followed, 13 years slipped away like a brief breeze, leaving behind only framed memories of their tender beginnings as parents holding their newborn baby. Yet inside their present home, a stark divide had formed, marked by a line of clear tape across the hallway floor that he was strictly forbidden to step across under his wife's rigid rules. Inside his home, his wife sits absorbed in her smartphone while their young daughter quietly eats her dinner across the dining table. The pair maintain a heavy silence, the mother completely preoccupied with her digital screen while the child silently chews her food. Having stepped inside the doorway, he is bound by a strict set of household rules forbidding any shared meals or spoken greetings, demanding complete silence whenever doors are moved. The restrictions go even further, permitting him access to the wash basin but deeming the toilet strictly off-limits. As he tiptoes down the hallway with his briefcase, a faint aroma catches his attention, leading him to realize that they are enjoying grilled fish without him. Confined to his own secluded bedroom, he eats a packaged convenience store meal in solitude on the edge of his bed, his eyes fixed on a small television. The next morning dawns over the sprawling cityscape, bathing the high-rises in the soft light of early morning. Standing among the crowd of morning commuters at the train station, he checks his phone and mentally prepares for another exhausting day, reminding himself that providing for his family comes before all else. Suddenly, a sharp, disorienting sensation strikes him, making his eyes widen in sudden pain and confusion. As the incoming train pulls into the platform, he clutches his head in agony as an overwhelming heaviness settles over his mind, barely hearing the automated safety warnings echoing across the station. He stumbled backward on the crowded station platform, almost tumbling into the path of the incoming train before a pair of hands caught him just in time. Overwhelmed by shock, he stammered out a frantic apology, his chest pounding as he realized how close he had come to disaster, while his savior calmly observed how dangerous the situation had been, guiding him to the quiet shelter of the station waiting room. She looked down at his pale face with genuine concern, offering to call a staff member to assist. Slumped on the wooden bench, he waved off her concern with a weak insistence that he was fine, though his trembling posture suggested otherwise. To shift his mind away from the surge of panic, she suddenly posed a strange riddle about Japanese pottery styles, catching him completely off guard. As he pondered the puzzle in confusion, she quickly demurred, explaining that constructing riddles was simply an awkward habit she relied on to relieve tension. Realizing her deliberate distraction had successfully brought his racing pulse back under control, he quietly acknowledged her clever trick. Staring into her eyes, an unsettling sensation washed over him that he had encountered this woman somewhere before, even as she offered to fetch water for any medication he might need. Declining her offer, he assured her with a weary expression that the intense head pressure was fading and that he was feeling better. Opening up to this attentive stranger, he began confiding the surreal details of his domestic isolation, describing his household's hostile restrictions as a baffling riddle his wife had constructed around him. He sat stunned as the spectacled woman plainly diagnosed his situation, telling him that what he described sounded like nothing less than domestic violence. Her blunt assessment left him utterly speechless, his eyes widening in shock as the reality of her words sank in. He began to regret revealing so much, wishing he had kept the truth to himself rather than framing his family's unusual household rules in a way that sounded so severe. He recalled standing in the apartment hallway with Ichika, hesitantly asking her if she knew the name of the actress her mother admired so much. He watched as the young girl quietly stood up to walk away, struck by how much taller she had grown since they last met, yet relieved when she suddenly paused to listen. She listened silently while he stammered out an explanation, apologizing for calling her out so suddenly and explaining that he had met an actress who strongly resembled the one her mother liked. His rambling explanation was met with a cold, unblinking glare from the young girl, her dark eyes filled with quiet resentment. She finally broke her silence, delivering a blunt and chilling response. Her mother had explicitly forbidden her from speaking to him. Her harsh rejection left him completely stunned, the painful realization of how deeply his family had alienated him hanging heavily in the silence. He stood frozen near the elevator beside her, trapped in an agonizing quiet as they waited together, unable to bridge the painful distance between them. As he stood motionless, shaken by her words, his young daughter timidly called out to him. His mind flashed back to another confrontation within the apartment, where his wife walked down the hallway, refusing to believe he could ever do such a thing. Attempting to bridge the divide, he quietly noted how long it had been since they last spoke, begging her to sit down and talk, but his plea was met with a furious scream that he was crossing the line. When she abruptly turned to leave, he lunged forward and grabbed her wrist, pleading with her to just hear him out for a second. Reacting with intense revulsion, she violently slapped his hand away and screamed at him to never touch her. As she recoiled further into the room, he remained frozen near the doorway, still desperately calling out her name. Without warning, a hurled object shattered violently against his shielding arm, spraying liquid and sharp shards everywhere as he winced in pain. Her eyes wide with unhinged fury, she spat that they had nothing left to discuss and issued a stern warning never to attempt speaking to their daughter again. Returning to the harsh present, he emerged from the towering apartment building into the gloomy drizzle outside. Breathing heavily, he broke into a desperate run through the falling rain, attempting to outrun the agonizing memories of his past. He comes to a staggering halt, his heart pounding violently against his ribs as he gasps for air beside the pedestrian barrier. Staring ahead through the heavy downpour, his eyes fixate on Furii Bridge, a place deeply intertwined with his past. Recalling the compulsion that drove him here, he remembers taking out his phone in the rain to draft a new riddle, feeling an overwhelming urge to post his private anguish on his social media. The bridge spans across the water, a solitary landmark quietly safeguarding a collection of his most cherished and painful memories. Leaning weary against the metal edge, a vivid memory of Mao's gentle, reassuring smile surfaces in his mind, briefly bringing a tranquil warmth to his distressed spirit. Gripping the cold railing tightly, despair washes back over him as he agonizes over how to repair their shattered connection, horrified by the thought of living in this painful distance forever. Meanwhile, the sound of rushed, heavy breathing breaks through the sound of falling rain as a woman hurries across the walkway under her umbrella. She slows her pace as she reaches the bridge, spotting his solitary figure standing motionless near the edge. Stepping beside him, she tilts her umbrella over his head to shield him from the pouring rain, asking softly if he is all right. Startled from his inner turmoil, he turns his head, his wide eyes immediately recognizing the woman with glasses standing before him. She gently explains that having seen his latest social media post, she knew something was troubling him, remembering how he always turns to writing riddles whenever he suffers in silence. She calmly held up her smartphone display, revealing how simple it had been to decipher his online post. The answer to his riddle was the very name of the bridge where he now stood. Stunned by her insight, he could barely process her words as she firmly called out his riddle for what it truly was, a desperate cry for help. Stepping close beneath the shared cover of the umbrella to shield him from the pouring rain, she looked directly at him and asked a piercing question, challenging whether a family that brings nothing but pain and suffering is truly worth preserving. Closing the distance until they were inches apart, her gaze locked onto his trembling face as she leaned in and delivered a provocative suggestion, asking why he didn't simply throw everything away. Standing beside his teacher at the front of classroom 1-2, the new transfer student, Hikari Karashiki, introduced himself casually to his new peers. Because the transfer had been arranged so abruptly, the instructor scratched his head in dilemma, trying to figure out where to place him in an already full classroom. Glancing across the room, the teacher noticed an empty desk and remembered that Ichika Shinoya was absent for the day, offering her temporary spot as an immediate solution. Meanwhile, across town at the central library, Ichika stood quietly near the glass entrance as heavy rain fell outside, holding her folded umbrella. Moving deeper into the quiet aisle surrounded by bookshelves, she placed her heavy leather bag on a study table to prepare for her work. As she pulled out her smartphone, A notification popped up on the screen, alerting her that a new riddle had just been posted online. Examining the post made by user Raytaro, she read the cryptic line about where emotions convert in a wish for peace, wondering if the phrase hid a coded message. Analyzing the phrasing more closely, she contemplated whether the term wishing to be at peace was actually a chilling euphemism for death itself. Her eyes narrowed as she noticed a location embedded at the start of the post, leaving her to ponder if this intricate puzzle was secretly intended for someone specific. While she remained engrossed in her research, a heavy downpour beat relentlessly against the exterior of the building. Having stepped out into the storm, he had returned thoroughly drenched, prompting her to fussily dry his hair with a towel while lecturing him about catching a cold. He politely tried to decline her excessive hospitality, offering to take the umbrella and return it tomorrow, but she insistently urged him to stay and shelter from the rain. Stepping closer, he reached out to adjust the collar around her neck, gently assuring her that all rain eventually comes to an end. Thanking her for her kindness, he insisted that his house was nearby and turned to leave without taking the umbrella, leaving her startled by his sudden departure. Overcome by panic, she suddenly shouted out after him, desperately crying that suicide was never the answer. With an intensely serious look behind her glasses, she pleaded with him to value his precious life, leaving him thoroughly bewildered. She continued her passionate outburst, pacing wildly while assuring him that he was not alone and could trust her, while he tried in vain to interrupt. Finally gaining a moment to speak, he loudly clarified that he had never intended to end his life, explaining that he had only gone to the bridge to gather his thoughts. Blushing in embarrassment, she sheepishly admitted that his pale, despondent look on the bridge and at the station had made her fear the worst. She bowed her head in embarrassment, profusely apologizing for the massive misunderstanding while holding up her phone toward him. Pressing the issue further, the young woman eagerly pointed to the screen, explaining that it was all because of his latest online riddle. Displayed across the digital device was the exact message he had posted, a cryptic puzzle about finding peace where emotions connect. Confronting him with her reasoning, she confessed that his words about finding peace had sounded deeply alarming, prompting him to realize she had deciphered the clue he wrote on the bridge. The clue's phrase about connecting emotions had directly referred to Fury Eye Bridge, while its final line had carried an unintentionally grim undertone. Upon grasping this, his eyes widened as the realization struck him all at once. As he admitted that it was only meant to be a simple puzzle, she softly asked if the post had actually been his desperate cry for help. Looking at her earnest, gentle expression, he was stunned to realize that she had not only solved his riddle and understood his hidden pain, but had actively rushed out to find him. Softening his expression with a gentle smile, he offered her a warm thank you, praising her impressive, sharp intuition. Yet deep down, he quietly acknowledged to himself that her dramatic assumption wasn't entirely wrong, remembering how dark his thoughts had truly been as he stood staring into the water below. She listened quietly as the young man bowed deeply before her, expressing his sincere gratitude. He admitted that creating riddles at the station was just a hobby, a brief escape from reality, but assured her that he was doing fine now. Seeing her gentle smile, he reflected on how remarkable her gesture was. Out of several thousand people who had seen his online post, she was the only one who had managed to decipher his location and reach out to him. She then began nudging him inside her apartment, insisting on helping him out. He nervously stammered that she didn't need to go through all this trouble, but she paid no mind to his hesitation, determined to let him dry off and buy him a fresh shirt. Saluting him with a bright, playful grin, she promised to be right back, urging him to consider this as a simple token of thanks for his help earlier. The moment the door clicked shut, he was left standing alone in her entryway, momentarily stunned by how quickly she had taken off. Looking down the quiet hallway, he noticed numerous cardboard boxes stacked against the wall, realizing she must have moved in only recently. Out of curiosity, he pulled out his phone to look up her social media profile, only to gawk in utter disbelief upon seeing that she had over 30,000 followers. Flustered by the dramatic contrast to his own modest following, he wondered when someone so popular had started following him, deciding to take a quick scroll through her page. As her social feed loaded, his breath caught at the sight of glamour photos featuring her in daring swimwear, showcasing an entirely unexpected side of her life. Red-faced and panicked, he hurriedly shut his phone, praying he hadn't crossed a line while wondering why such a stunning figure would ever want to get involved with him. He stood alone in the quiet apartment, contemplating whether he should slip away before she returned. The rain outside was beginning to clear, but leaving unannounced felt wrong, knowing he would owe her an explanation later. Yet, the stunning photos he had just uncovered left his mind reeling. The vivid, wild energy of her online persona seemed impossibly detached from the quiet, gentle woman who lived here. Outside, footsteps echoed in the corridor as she made her way back through the damp streets, while inside, his pulse raced with mounting nervous anticipation. A moment later, the front door clicked open, and she stepped inside carrying a small shopping bag. Seeing her return brought him back to reality as he stood frozen near the hallway. Relieved to see him still waiting, she offered a warm smile and handed over a fresh shirt, directing him toward the washroom. He could barely stammer out a greeting, overwhelmed by her sudden generosity. As he hesitantly accepted the gift and expressed his deep gratitude, she warmly brushed off his worries. Unpacking fresh steamed buns she had picked up on her way home, she insisted they sit down together and share a bite. With a bright expression, she held out a hot, freshly steamed bun for him to take. Staring at the comfort food, he struggled to reconcile her warm, domestic presence with the alluring figure he had seen on her profile, deciding he would simply finish eating and head home. Holding the warm snack in his hands, he candidly asked if it was the standard fare from the local convenience store. Noticing his slight hesitation, she looked at him with sudden concern, worried he might not like what she brought. Flustered by her reaction, he quickly tried to clarify, reassuring her that he was merely accustomed to eating store-bought meals almost every day. She listened quietly, curious about his routine. Looking down with a trace of vulnerability, he quietly confessed how long he had relied on those solitary convenience store meals. The small moment of shared warmth seemed to stir something deep within him. He listened quietly as she passionately declared that food always tastes better when shared with loved ones, insisting that everyone deserves a comforting space to relax. Moments later, her phone vibrated with an incoming call from Kazumi, prompting her to glance at the screen before reaching toward him. Flushed with warmth, she offered her earnest support, asking if she could become the safe haven where he could cast aside his worries. As Sawako offers to be a sanctuary where he can find peace from his troubles, the tender moment is abruptly interrupted by the chime of his phone. He stares at the screen in pure shock, his eyes wide, while she watches his reaction with deep concern. Hesitantly bringing the device to his ear, he stammers a tentative greeting after answering the incoming call. On the line, his wife urgently apologizes for what took place earlier, her tone heavy with regret as she reaches out to him. She explains that immense stress regarding their daughter, Ichika, caused her outburst, while he stammers back, admitting he was terrified and expressing remorse for his own panic during the incident. She goes on to reveal that Ichika has been secretly skipping school every single day, feigning a normal morning routine while abandoning her classes entirely. The revelation clicks in his mind, finally illuminating why his wife was so deeply upset with him earlier, leaving him silent as he sits beside Sawako. Looking back on his recent distant behavior toward Ichika, he suffers a wave of guilt, recognizing that he completely neglected his duties as a father by ignoring her visible struggles. He remains shattered by the truth, utterly crushed by the realization that he remained blind to his own daughter's secret burden for so long. He listens quietly as Sawako offers gentle words of comfort, assuring him that teenagers often go through rebellious phases and urging him not to be too hard on himself. Following her reassuring words, he steps into the quiet corridor outside, pausing by the door as the weight of his thoughts lingers. As he turns to leave, she calls out to him from the doorway, sensing the heavy burden he still carries. He reflects on her earlier warning, realizing that pretending everything is resolved would be foolish, and that he must still find a true answer to his family's complex situation. Meanwhile at school, classmates chatter in the lively classroom, noting how rarely Ichika attends while Hikari sits casually at her desk. Spotting the unfamiliar boy in her seat, she immediately turns around to walk away, prompting Hikari to jump up in surprise and call after her. He hurries out into the hallway, keeping his eye on her distant figure as she walks quietly toward the staircase. Following her up the steps, he tries to close the distance between them. Catching up on the landing, he asks why she is running away from him, to which she coolly apologizes for mistakenly taking someone else's seat. She aloofly explains that she does not particularly care about the seat and only stopped by to fetch an old dictionary from her locker, asking if he will retrieve it for her, a task he readily accepts. He dashed through the sunlit school hallway, catching sight of the quiet girl seated alone on the stairwell landing, deeply engrossed in a book. As he came to a stop beside her, she accepted the thick, old Japanese dictionary he had fetched, thanking him warmly. When she asked why he was hanging around with class about to start, he admitted that curiosity had gotten the better of him regarding what she planned to do with the volume. Flipping through the pages, she explained that she had been pondering a mystery since yesterday and hoped the dictionary might hold a clue, though so far she had found nothing. The spiky-haired boy leaned over, carefully observing her frustrated efforts. Intrigued by the idea of a riddle, he sat down right beside her on the stairs, asking if he could take a look at what she was working on. Peering over her shoulder, he pondered the phrasing and suggested that the phrase, "where emotions connect," might actually refer to a physical location rather than an abstract concept. Sudden illumination washing over his face. Excitedly, he put two and two together, proposing that it referred to a place named Furii, a spot meant for connecting one's emotions with inner peace, while she listened in stolid silence. Noticing her glare intensify, he quickly pulled back, stammering an apology as he realized he might have spoken too boldly or overstepped his bounds. He stammered on, asking whether such a place even existed outside of his wild guess, only for her to calmly confirm that a location by that exact name did indeed exist. Later in the classroom, as the final bell chimed, his peers invited him to check out various clubs, but he politely declined, waving farewell as he explained he had urgent business to attend to. Stepping outside into the courtyard to search for her, he was suddenly startled when she grabbed his sleeve, pulling him along forcefully as startled black cats scattered from the nearby bushes. She had led him to Furii Bridge, a sprawling suspension structure spanning across the river. Standing side by side against the railing, he remarked on how refreshing the cool breeze felt after yesterday's heavy rain, taking in the serene view of the sunset over the city skyline. A heavy silence settled between them as he glanced over at her, though she remained staring wordlessly into the distance. With a sigh of quiet disappointment, she admitted she had hoped visiting this spot might yield some kind of clue or reward, leaving her feeling as though the trip had been in vain. Realizing he had not properly introduced himself, he mentioned his name was Hikari Karashiki and explained that he had just moved into town yesterday, before gently asking why she rarely attended school. Brightening up, he enthusiastically proposed that they become friends, pointing out how much more enjoyable school would be if they went together, though she merely met his offer with an unamused side glance. She countered his cheerful demeanor by clarifying that her frequent absences were not an act of rebellious defiance or a desire to play the troublemaker, but stemmed from something far more complex. Pouring out her heart, she confessed her painful desire for her mother and father to simply treat each other with kindness, though she felt utterly helpless to change their broken dynamic. Hearing this, he quickly reassured her that he deeply understood the agony of living in a fractured home. He went on to share his own troubled past, revealing that he grew up without a father and that his mother's former lover had harassed and stalked her so relentlessly that they were ultimately forced to pack up and move away. As his words hung in the air, she stood in contemplative silence, absorbing the weight of his shared struggle under the fading twilight. She explained how she had stumbled across an online account that shared her father's name and posted daily riddles, admitting that she sometimes wished the person behind it were her actual father. Looking out over the shimmering water alongside Hikari, she softly remarked on how breathtaking the sunset looked that evening. Wanting to preserve the serene moment, she raised her smartphone to capture a photo of the vibrant evening sky. Meanwhile, across the city, the young man walked along a busy train platform, checking his phone as commuters bustled past. Glancing down at his screen, he noticed a new notification from a user named Pyo, featuring a photograph of the sunset at Furii Bridge and a message thanking him for the riddle. Reading the post with a quiet sense of wonder, he realized that someone had actually gone to the bridge to solve his riddle and see the view for themselves. Memories washed over him as he recalled the profound significance of that location, the very spot where he had once stood beside Sawako, finding inner peace and fully accepting his role as a father. Boarding his train, he took a seat among the quiet passengers, remaining deep in thought as the car rattled along the tracks. A sudden, sharp movement of the train jolted him out of his reverie, forcing him to grip his bag tightly as the carriage swayed. As he steadied himself, a shocking realization struck him with staggering force, leaving him wide-eyed and frozen in disbelief. While his mind was still reeling from the sudden shock, elsewhere a woman was struck by an epiphany. She finally understood the true reason behind his long-standing resentment toward her. As she grasped the truth, he stood frozen on the illuminated nighttime street, staring anxious and wide-eyed at his vibrating phone. Meanwhile, inside a quiet apartment building across town, two girls lay peacefully asleep under the dark cover of night. That peaceful atmosphere was abruptly interrupted when a low, continuous buzz from a phone on the floor stirred Ichika from her sleep. Turning toward the sound, she blinked sleepily and called out to her roommate, who was already sitting bolt upright in bed. On the other end of the line, he pressed the phone against his ear as an urgent, demanding voice shouted his name, determined to clear up years of misunderstanding. Late into the night, Sawako sat up in her bedroom to answer a sudden phone call. The caller apologized for reaching out at such an ungodly hour, explaining that it was the only time they could speak directly, but Sawako made no effort to hide her frustration at being disturbed. She attempted to shut down the conversation immediately, pointing out how late it had become and reminding him that Ichika was already asleep nearby, urging that any discussion wait until morning. He refused to yield, pleading earnestly to meet face-to-face tonight, desperate to finally lay all their issues out in the open and reach a definitive resolution. Sighing in defeat, she relented and agreed to meet him at a nearby family restaurant, stepping out of bed to prepare herself for the unexpected late-night encounter. Meanwhile, in her dark bedroom, Ichika sat up under her covers, having quietly monitored the entire phone exchange from her bed. Sitting on the edge of her bed, she contacted her friend to explain that her mother was quietly slipping away to meet her father, confessing how uneasy it made her feel. Her friend responded pragmatically, asking why she didn't just follow them if she was so concerned. Spurred by the suggestion, she quickly set up a meeting spot with him. While across town, Sawako made her way down the quiet night streets toward the restaurant. Bundled up in a dark beanie and heavy jacket, she arrived outside the bright venue just in time to spot her mother walking through the glass doors. As she stood watching the entrance, a familiar voice called out to her, and she turned to see Hikari running down the sidewalk to join her. He caught his breath with a cheerful smile, warmly thanking her for inviting him along to assist on her nighttime stakeout. He eagerly pulled his companion into the restaurant, asking the staff for a table for two while she followed close behind with hesitant steps. Once seated, the pair peeked over their booth to observe Sawako and the mysterious man talking at a table near the window. Realizing they were too far away to overhear the conversation, he suggested moving closer, but Ichika immediately vetoed the idea, fearing her parents would recognize her if they drew near. Watching them from a distance, the young girl reflected on how rare it was to see her mother and father sitting together to talk, uncertain whether this quiet encounter signaled hope or trouble. She explained that her father lived in his own isolated world with little interest in others, which only fueled her mother's intense, one-sided resentment toward him. She admitted that lately she understood her father's mindset better, feeling that she inherited his preference for solitude over social connection, making her the exact opposite of her mother. As she softly confessed her quiet desire to talk with her father more, despite fearing her mother's displeasure, he pointed out how deeply she truly cared for her parents, causing her to flush in embarrassment and deny it. Determined to help her, he stood up and proposed a bold plan to act like a regular customer and sit right beside her parents' booth. Leaving her behind at their initial table, he walked across the dimly lit restaurant toward the targeted booth with confidence. He casually slid into the booth directly behind her father, turning his ear toward them to stealthily gather every word of their conversation. He listened closely, catching every word from the booth behind him as the conversation took a dark, unexpected turn. He froze as Ichika's father delivered a devastating confession, admitting that the moment her mother chose the name Ichika, His immediate response was that it would be better to abort the baby. Nearby, the young girl sat in stunned silence, the devastating truth of her father's rejection heavy in her chest. Declaring that there was no longer any point in speaking, the mother rose to take her leave. Realizing her mother was leaving, Ichika panicked, knowing she had to race home immediately before her absence was discovered. Rushing past him on her way out, she pleaded with him to tell her everything he heard later before hurrying out into the night. As she fled down the street, he stood watching her disappear into the darkness, carrying the crushing weight of what he had just overheard. Stepping out of the restaurant, he waited quietly outside, the cold night air doing little to cool his rising anger. As the man in the suit finally emerged, a call from his mother buzzed in his pocket, but he paid it no mind, his eyes locked entirely on the man who had hurt his friend. Confronting the man directly, his gaze burned with intense rage as he declared that he was not worthy of calling himself Ichika's father. Caught completely by surprise by the fierce confrontation, the man turned, utter disbelief painted across his face. While he continued to ignore his mother's frantic phone calls, she stared at her screen in growing frustration, fuming over his late-night absence and vowing to give him a severe scolding the moment he returned home. Unable to simply wait around, she hurried out into the night, rushing down the neighborhood street past surprised passersby. Sprinting down the quiet alleys, her anger gave way to urgency as she searched for any sign of her headstrong son. Coming upon a brightly lit building entrance, her eyes widened as she spotted the boy confronting a man standing in the doorway. Meanwhile, the young boy unleashed his pent-up fury, demanding how the man could treat Ichika so callously when she cared so deeply for him, leaving the man completely baffled by the stranger's sudden hostility. Passionately raising his voice, he proclaimed that a father is morally obligated to love his child unconditionally, pointing out that while a man can have many children, a child only gets one father, and condemning him for trying to deny her existence before she even had a chance to live. Pulling back his arm, he declared that men who abandon their paternal duties deserve a severe beating and vowed to deliver that hard lesson himself. Just as the punch was thrown, his mother hurled herself between them with a frantic cry, spreading her arms wide to shield the man from the blow. Confusion instantly washed over everyone as she recognized the target as Reitaro, leaving her son stunned by their apparent acquaintance while she immediately bowed in deep, frantic apology for her son's reckless outburst. Though her son loudly insisted that the man deserved to be hit, she sternly reprimanded him for staying out so late and nearly resorting to violence. Ignoring his protests as she maintained her discipline, she turned to her son, questioning his uncharacteristic hostility, and realized he must have overheard the private discussion between her and her husband. Scolding the boy for eavesdropping, she watched as Reitaro stepped forward, turning to Hikari to ask if he was indeed Ichika's friend who had listened in on their entire conversation from start to finish. Consumed by indignation, the teenager spat back that hearing those words was no accident, furious at the foul sentiments that had come straight out of the man's mouth. Reitaro could only stare in somber silence as Hikari voiced the painful truth, accusing him of claiming his wife would have been better off aborting their child and stripping away Ichika's chance at life. A heavy tension settled over them, mother and son exchanging a serious, unblinking glare amidst the confrontation. Breaking the quiet, Sawako firmly questioned her son, asking if he had truly listened to every single word or if he was jumping to conclusions based on a fleeting snippet. She reminded him that every person bears their own hidden reasons and complex burdens, warning him that it was wrong to judge someone's character based on assumptions. Calming the mood, she gently urged her son to set aside his rage and give the man a chance to explain what he truly. Reitaro calmly confronts Hikari, asking if he actually heard the whole truth or simply jumped to a conclusion after overhearing a single detail, suspecting it was the latter. In response, the boy snaps back, asking why anyone would bother listening to what someone like him had to say. Wave after wave of anger takes over as he shouts that nobody wants to hear another word, accusing Reitaro of spinning even more lies to cover his tracks. Reaching a boil, he bellows at both of them, vehemently demanding that they never speak of killing a child ever again. Turning his frustration onto his mother, he berates her gullibility, blaming her habit of trusting another man for landing them in constant trouble. He presses on relentlessly, bringing up how her stalker situation forced them to relocate and demanding that if she ever moves again, she do so alone instead of dragging him along. As his mother tries to interject, he cuts her off completely, shouting with finality that he refuses to change schools ever again. With those frantic words, he bolts down the residential street, running away as fast as his feet can carry him. In the quiet stillness left in his wake, the two stand on the sidewalk, processing the weight of his furious outburst. Breaking the uncomfortable silence, she turns to Reitaro with a soft apology for her son's behavior, inviting him to share what he originally intended to say. She had agreed to meet him at a late-night family restaurant, the quiet ambient glow framing their sudden meeting. He lowered his head and apologized profusely for summoning her out in the middle of the night, emphasizing that he desperately needed to discuss an urgent matter regardless of the inconvenience. His awkward admission that the issue involved their household toilet left her staring in sharp disbelief, openly questioning his sanity for dragging her out so late over something seemingly trivial. Facing her fierce skepticism, he begged her to hear him out, revealing that his trauma with the bathroom stemmed from when his wife experienced severe morning sickness while carrying Ichika. He recounted a painful memory when his wife had been forced to throw up in the hallway because he was occupying the bathroom, leading him to avoid using it altogether in a flawed attempt to help that only pushed them further apart. His explanation was met with stern anger as she pressed him on whether he was genuinely trying to deceive her with such an absurd story. Her cold scrutiny weighed heavily on him, making his heart pound with guilt as the memory of his wife's gentle smile contrasted sharply with his current predicament. He gazed down at a photo on his phone, recalling the solemn promise he had made on Fury Eye Bridge to do everything in his power to be a good husband and father. He vividly remembered the dreadful evening when that promise was tested, returning home only to find his pregnant wife collapsed helpless on the floor before rushing her to the general hospital. He stood stunned inside the medical room as the doctor casually dismissed her collapse as typical morning sickness, leaving him deeply disturbed by the lack of concern for her suffering. He stood frozen in the hospital hallway, swallowing back his words as he watched his wife struggle in deep distress. Overcome by misery, she collapsed into a crouch on the floor, questioning why she was forced to endure such torment alone while he hurriedly offered to fetch a wheelchair. She wept bitterly, explaining how constant nausea prevented her from holding down anything but water, forcing her to abandon the career she had worked so hard to build. Her agonized cry that none of this was fair hit him like a physical blow, leaving him completely stunned and helpless. Looking down at her as she clutched her mouth, he saw the growing resentment and raw exhaustion in her eyes. The debilitating morning sickness had completely transformed her, destroying her life as a dental hygienist and leaving her hollowed out and agitated with each passing day. Standing silently beside her in the corridor, a cold dread seized him as he realized that watching her wither away was slowly tearing his soul apart. He found himself trapped in a heartbreaking conflict between preserving the life of the woman he loved and protecting the unborn child growing inside her. Driven by panic and foolish naivety, his mind snapped, leading him to suggest something terrible, words he could never take back. The tragic consequence unfolded immediately, and by the very next day, a rigid boundary of clear tape was permanently stretched across their home. Sitting across from Reitaro in the quiet diner, the woman confronted him directly, demanding to know if he had finally grasped the weight of his familial responsibilities and questioning whether his urge to apologize was truly meant for Ichika. She leaned forward slightly, her voice sharp as she reminded him that every cruel word and letter he had ever uttered remained painfully burned into her memory, pressing him to admit if he finally understood the hurt he had caused. Looking him dead in the eye over her drink, she challenged him to repeat those exact words right then and there, declaring that only if he had the courage to say them aloud again would she even consider forgiving him. Glancing down at his hands, Reitaro stared at the glowing screen of his smartphone, where a message alongside a photo of a serene sunset triggered the painful memory of the moment that had preceded his devastating mistake. He recalled standing beside her along the river railing under a vibrant evening sky, listening as she joyfully insisted that despite what any doctor said, she knew deep down their unborn child was going to be a baby girl. She had turned to him with a radiant, blissful smile, excitedly revealing that she had already chosen the name Ichika for their daughter and asking if he agreed that it was a lovely name. Returning to the agonizing present, he hung his head in overwhelming guilt, his face soaked in sweat as he admitted that when she had proudly suggested the name Ichika, his cruel response had been that they should abort the child instead. Across the table, she remained completely silent, her posture unyielding as his painful confession settled into the suffocating quiet between them. Raising his eyes in anxious dread, he was met only with her icy detachment as she coldly asked if that was all he had to say, leaving him to offer a quiet, defeated confirmation. Deciding that further conversation was entirely pointless, she stood up from the booth and announced her departure, turning her back on him and stepping out of the restaurant into the cool air outside. She listened in stunned silence as he admitted that her son had been right, confessing that no parent should ever say such a thing and that he fully deserved to be isolated by his own family. His agonizing confession left her speechless, tears filling her eyes as she trembled at the weight of his words. She looked up in anguish as he leaned in closer, softly offering her comfort by telling her that her harsh words came from genuine concern and that she was the one suffering most. He could only watch as she struggled to hold back her tears, choking out a hasty apology before bidding him goodnight and telling him it was time to go home. She could no longer hold back her emotions, covering her face with both hands as she wept silently. As she stood crying outside the shop, he slowly walked away into the night, pausing for a moment to glance back at her with a heavy, conflicted heart. His mind began to wander as he walked, plagued by memories of sitting alongside his former family in quieter times. Meanwhile, in a sunlit traditional room, the little fox spirit sat comfortably at a warm kotatsu, happily enjoying a rice ball. A lone silhouette stood at the far end of the quiet hallway, motionless amidst the symmetrical doors lining the corridor. Returning to the solitude of his room, Reitaro sat back on his bed, the weight of recent events pressing heavily upon his mind as he stared into the quiet space around him. He recalled the sight of Sawako, her shoulders trembling with intense emotion as tears spilled past her glasses, a display of sorrow that had caught him completely off guard. Holding his phone silently, the young man pondered whether she had been shedding those bitter tears on his behalf, carrying a grief he felt incapable of expressing himself. Deep down, he knew he was the one who truly ought to have wept. In all his life, he had never witnessed someone weep so intensely for another's pain. Glancing at his phone screen, he contemplated the connections between them all. The boy named Hikari, who was Sawako's son and the same age as Ichika, and the uncanny resemblance Sawako bore to an actress he couldn't quite place. Thinking of how fiercely Hikari had stepped up to defend Ichika, Reitaro realized that genuine friendship truly existed out in the world, feeling a subtle sense of relief for Ichika's sake. He began to question why Sawako sympathized so deeply with his burden, wondering if she carried a similar guilt from her own past that drew her to his pain. Dismissing the thought, he cautioned himself against jumping to selfish conclusions, contemplating the uneasy possibility that her tears might have simply been a calculated facade. Yet as he rested his head against the pillow, the unanswered question lingered in his mind. If it truly was an act, what reason could she possibly have for playing such a part? He observed quietly from inside as Ichika gathered her bag outside the apartment door and began her morning walk down the corridor. Peeking out from behind his door frame, he cautiously tracked her departure down the hallway. He mused over the situation, reasoning that if she was merely feigning a normal school routine, she would likely make her detour only after putting sufficient distance between herself and the building. Maintaining a subtle distance, he trailed her down the quiet residential street, watching as a small black cat trotted along beside her. When she paused to crouch down and playfully urged the stray cat not to be late, he remained concealed nearby, keeping a careful eye on her. As she resumed her journey, he continued shadowing her through the neighborhood, staying far enough behind to avoid attracting attention. Noticing that she was taking a route away from her school, he realized the path matched a cryptic pattern, inwardly chiding himself for getting distracted by riddles at such a critical moment. Before he could process the realization, a familiar voice interrupted his thoughts as Sawako unexpectedly approached him from behind. Startled by her sudden presence, he blurted out her name, which delighted her, though she promptly questioned why he was acting so suspiciously behind a utility pole. Fumbling for an explanation, He awkwardly claimed he was merely keeping an eye on whether his ward was heading off to school properly. He watched as the young girl continued her solitary trek down the path, glancing back briefly before proceeding away from school. Suddenly, the chime of the school bell echoed in the distance, prompting the woman beside him to point out that classes were about to begin. Flustered by the sudden reminder, he tried to protest, but she kindly offered to follow the girl in his place so he wouldn't miss his own obligations. Hesitant yet desperate, he asked if she was truly willing to help just this once. With a reassuring smile, she insisted it was no trouble at all, promising to keep him informed. Overcome with gratitude, he bowed deeply, pleading with her to look after the girl while begging her never to reveal that he had been secretly tailing her. As the girl walked further away, he reflected on his shortcomings as a father figure, torn between a parent's duty to intervene and his uncertainty over how she truly perceived him. Walking beside his companion, he voiced his fear of causing disgust by invading her privacy, admitting that all he wished was to ease her burdens and ensure she was safe. Apologizing once more for burdening her with his personal troubles, he was met with her bright and cheerful assurance that she would handle everything. With a final bow of thanks, he turned to leave for school, leaving his trusted ally to take over the delicate task. Meanwhile, oblivious to the change in watchers behind her, the girl silently continued her journey down the quiet residential street. She sat quietly inside the central library, completely unaware that Sawako was observing her from behind a magazine, deciding it was best to keep her distance rather than risk reaching out and arousing suspicion. Peering over the top of her pages, the watchful guardian maintained her vantage point while the unsuspecting girl remained entirely absorbed in the book before her. As the library clock ticked past noon, the observer began to wonder how long she planned to stay, only to be startled when Hikari suddenly appeared right at the study table. He eagerly offered her some bread and yogurt brought straight from the cafeteria, though she quickly reminded him of the strict no-food policy inside. Unfazed, he suggested stepping outside once he finished solving an online puzzle. Watching the two teenagers converse over the newly posted riddle, Sawako felt a quiet swell of affection, touched that the boy had brought food simply out of concern for his classmates' hunger. Displayed across the phone screen was Ryutaro's latest puzzle, describing a bumpy road with endless ups and downs that many nevertheless continue to walk. Checking her own device, she gasped softly upon seeing the notification, realizing that Ryutaro had published the riddle just a few moments prior. Meanwhile, a sharp-featured man in a dark suit quietly pondered whether solving these riddles was her only way of communicating with her father, given their inability to speak freely. He kept his gaze fixed on the quiet scene from across the room, wondering if she was working through her father's puzzles without even grasping their underlying meaning. Back at the study table, he proudly announced that he had already cracked the answer, playfully offering a hint to the stumped girl who stubbornly refused any assistance. She sat quietly beside him in the library, pressing for answers about what he had overheard the previous day, all while Miss Sawako pretended to focus on a magazine nearby. Faced with her intense stare, he wiped away a bead of sweat and hesitated, questioning whether she truly needed to uncover every single detail of his conversation with her parents. Fixing him with an unyielding gaze, she explained that her sole intention was to learn the truth about her family, needing to know if her parents were planning to get a divorce. Peering over the top of her open magazine, the librarian quietly tracked every nuance of their conversation. Eager to put her worries to rest, he immediately reassured her that her parents had mentioned nothing of the sort. Lowering her eyes with a quiet sense of relief, she murmured that hearing those words brought her immense comfort. Realizing that time was slipping away, the two students quickly gathered their things to return to class, leaving the library under Miss Sawako's watchful gaze. As they walked together back toward the school building, he observed her composed demeanor and felt confident that she would handle whatever lay ahead. Watching the pair from behind, Miss Sawako reflected silently, believing Ryutaro would be overjoyed to see his daughter taking delight in solving his riddles. Outside, the sharp-looking man in the suit paused abruptly as an incoming message from Sayako appeared on his phone, signaling the arrival of her latest findings. He stared down at his screen, reading the initial observation about Ichika taking a detour to the central library before heading to school. The message continued with detailed findings, explaining how the informant had overheard the teenager's conversation, discovering that Ichika had been deeply anxious about her parents potentially divorcing until Hikari reassured her, while also noting their growing closeness as they discussed novels on their walk back. Breathing a quiet sigh of relief, he typed out a response to express his deep gratitude for her assistance, offering a playful hint that the solution to her daily riddle was concealed right within her own report. Deep in thought, Ichika pondered the metaphors of life as she walked down a peaceful street, musing over the concepts of obstacles and delays on one's journey. She continued her quiet stroll through the neighborhood, bag in hand, and thoroughly absorbed in her private reflections. Upon reaching school, she was confronted on the stairwell by Hikari, who anxiously brought up the secret conversation he had overheard between her parents. She turned to him with a cool, unbothered expression, calmly asking what he meant by bringing it up now. He pressed on earnestly, assuring her that he would always be her ally before revealing the cruel secret he had overheard, that her father had favored aborting her before birth. She took the harsh truth with startling calmness, responding with a simple, indifferent reaction that left him completely baffled by her lack of emotion. As he tried to make sense of her composure, she reasoned that she had never been a particularly cute or affectionate daughter anyway, treating the heavy disclosure with detachment. She noted that regardless of her father's past wishes, she was still alive today, while he watched her in awe, silently contrasting her mental fortitude with his own fragile state. He shuddered at his own inner dread, tortured by the constant anxiety that his own mother might abandon him at any given moment. While he and Ichika remained absorbed in their emotional exchange on the upper landing, a man in a formal suit quietly descended the stairs past them. As the man in the suit approached, the boy declared to his companion that he would grow strong enough to leave his mother before she could abandon him. Reaching the top of the stairs, the teacher, Mr. Ajino, called out to the girl, requesting to schedule a meeting with her parents. Meanwhile, in a quiet art museum, Sawako walked through the gallery alongside an acquaintance. He commented on her youthful appearance for a mother of a middle schooler, questioning if her life as a housewife was boring. When he boldly suggested they go to a hotel room together to chat, her expression instantly darkened. She glared at him coldly, sharply questioning why he assumed she would ever indulge such vulgar intentions. Stammering in surprise, he tried to excuse himself by claiming he thought they had gotten along well the day before. Unmoved by his excuses, she firmly cut him off, stating she had no tolerance for such distasteful advances and wanted to stop immediately. As he stood silenced by her rejection, she quietly wished in her heart that Reitaro had been the one accompanying her instead. Turning her focus away, she softly pondered picking out a souvenir for Reitaro, hoping to rest after a long day. She fondly reflected on Reitaro's quiet nature, remembering how clearly he expressed himself without words and how deeply connected they once felt. While walking down the neighborhood street, a young boy carrying a taped cardboard box caught her attention as he passed by. Faint scratching noises came from inside the box, making the boy clutch it nervously as they crossed paths. Sawako stepped over to investigate, asking the distressed boy what was inside the box. The boy tearfully stammered in defense, but Sawako firmly asked if he was abandoning a cat. Sobbing, he explained that his family was moving to a pet-free apartment and his parents forced him to choose between the cat or moving with them. Her companion listened in shock as the boy cried out that he had no other choice. As a small cat peeked out from the cardboard flaps, both women expressed horror at the situation. Walking away together, they questioned what kind of parents would force a child to make such a heartbreaking decision. Sawako angrily criticized the parents, calling their ultimatum a selfish excuse that would leave the boy permanently traumatized. She listened in silent attention as the mother recounted her past, explaining how her own husband had once forced her into an agonizing dilemma, a choice regarding whether to preserve a life that would profoundly alter her future. The woman recalled the painful words spoken during that crisis, when he weighed her deteriorating health against the child growing inside her, uttering a statement so permanent that it could never be taken back. Seeking validation after sharing the painful memory, she looked to her companion and asked if the situation did not sound truly horrific. Rather than offering simple sympathy, her companion pointed out firmly that she was a grown adult, completely distinct from her helpless child. Unmoved by the distinction, the The mother insisted that the worst part was her husband's complete ignorance of the hurt he caused, making it utterly impossible for her to ever forgive him. With a composed and almost casual demeanor, her sharp listener offered a drastic solution, asking whether it would not be better to simply throw the man away if he was truly that terrible. The sudden proposal left the mother paralyzed in stunned silence, her eyes widening in disbelief. A subtle, disturbing smile crossed the listener's face as she softly delivered her true intention, telling her to hand him over once he was discarded. Meanwhile, back at the residence, Reitaro gasped in surprise upon entering the hallway and discovering Ichika sitting quietly near the stairs. Acknowledging their awkward dynamic, he explained that despite her tendency to slip away to school in silence, he wanted them to establish a habit of greeting each other whenever leaving or returning home. Receiving his proposed household boundary with a flat, casual response, she offered little more than a quiet agreement. Turning toward the front door with her school bag in hand, she casually called out a farewell, calling him Dad as she departed for the day. In a short side story, a young boy brings home a stray kitten found on his doorstep, eagerly asking his mother if they can keep it despite her initial reluctance. While the mother worries about house rules and the prospect of taking it to a shelter, the boy remains stubbornly confident, prompting his aunt to tease him about his surprisingly adult attitude. Knowing his aunt can't resist his charming, adorable demeanor, he enlists her help to persuade his mother to let the kittens. Standing inside the packed train, Ichika felt a wave of nausea, silently wishing for an open seat amidst the crowded commute. As the carriage rattled along the tracks, the space around her grew tighter with passengers continuously boarding. Suddenly, a sharp jerk of the train made a man behind her call out in surprise. Losing her balance with a cry, she stumbled backward directly against Reitaro as the train swayed violently. She immediately apologized, though the hostile commuter clicked his tongue, making her privately realize that he was actually the one who had shoved into her. When the aggressive passenger confronted her for complaining, Reitaro instantly stepped in to intervene. He immediately bowed deeply alongside Ichika, offering a sincere apology to the irritated commuter to quickly defuse the tension on the crowded platform. As the disgruntled man walked away, she turned to him in dismay, questioning why he felt compelled to take the blame for something he hadn't caused. He quietly explained that his priority was simply to prevent a prolonged dispute from blocking the busy flow of people at the terminal. Hearing his reasoning, she was struck by a wave of guilt, realizing that her sudden dizzy spell had caused the entire incident in the first place. Noticing her visible distress, he gentled his tone and asked if she was feeling unwell, explaining that he had seen her swaying in the crowd earlier. Flustered and blushing deeply, she covered her mouth, while he kindly reassured her that he would secure a seat for her as soon as the next train arrived. Later that day, he arrived back at his apartment, stepping into the quiet entryway corridor. Recalling how Ichika had made a point to greet him earlier that morning, he steeled his nerve and announced his return home. Inside the dining room, Ichika's mother and Senko were seated together at the table, hearing his voice echo from the front hall. Turning around in her seat toward the hallway, Senko prepared to welcome him back. As she faded into the background of memory, a quiet moment from the past unfolded inside the Hikari household, where Ichika's mother reached out to flick off the light switch while young Ichika sat at the dining table. She left the entryway draped in shadows, where Reitaro stood quietly, gazing down the darkened hallway. He paused, his wide eyes reflecting shock as the weight of the bitter memory settled over him. He remembered young Ichika looking up from her meal, asking her mother in earnest why the lights were off and if her father had returned, only to be met with a heavy silence. She finally broke her silence to explain that Ichika's father was different from everyone else, a man so stubborn that even simple truths could never reach him. She coldly concluded that there was no familial warmth left for him in this house, harboring a desperate wish to tell him that directly. He recalled how young Ichika had interpreted her mother's words as a riddle, asking if she was simply waiting for her father to solve it and hoping he would do so quickly. She stared back at her daughter in quiet frustration, realizing it was pointless to explain the tragic breakdown of their marriage to a child who mistook it for a game. While she remained trapped in those haunting thoughts of the past, Sayako was walking down a lonely street late at night, suddenly overcome by the terrifying feeling of being followed. Her panicked message flashed onto Ryutaro's phone screen begging for help, while she broke into a run, terrified that her past tormentor had returned. She sprinted down the dimly lit street, breathing heavily from panic and exhaustion as she finally spotted him standing under the parking sign. Reaching him at last, she offered a breathless greeting, while he anxiously asked if she was all right after receiving her urgent message. Overwhelmed by relief, she sank to her knees on the pavement, apologizing for dragging him out so late and reflecting on how moving away hadn't truly solved her stalker trouble. Hearing her words, he realized this was the real reason behind her recent relocation. Looking up at him with deep gratitude, she admitted she had trusted he would come to her rescue, lightly noting that she was at least prepared with comfortable sneakers. He urged her to stay calm and compose herself before anything else. Deciding it was safest to escort her back, he walked alongside her under a shared umbrella as rain began to fall softly, feeling a touch self-conscious in the quiet night air. She offered a bright smile, pointing out that since he had been supporting her continuously over the past few days, she felt compelled to find a way to repay his kindness, declaring that they were now even. As they strolled side by side down the quiet, car-lined street toward her apartment, he agreed that walking her all the way to her doorstep was the wisest choice. Upon arriving outside her front entrance, she bowed deeply in appreciation for his support throughout the evening, expressing her heartfelt thanks. As he turned to take his leave, she suggested that he bring Ichika along on his next visit, knowing the girl's love for cats. Right on cue, a stray feline appeared near a cardboard box, prompting him to remark that it hadn't been there on his prior visit. She then proposed inviting Ichika directly herself and having him come along as well, but he faltered, nervously admitting that inviting Ichika had become a complicated matter for him recently. He hesitated to accept her offer, struggling to find a gentle way to express his reluctance. Sayako, however, pressed on, suggesting that she could ask Ichika to visit her apartment so they could all spend time together, confident that Ichika would appreciate the gesture. After parting ways, he walked down the quiet street alone, troubled by an unsettling sensation of being watched, while resolving that he ought to distance himself from Ichika for a while. A subtle rustle behind him shattered the silence, instantly heightening his anxiety that the stalker Sayako mentioned might now be targeting him. Turning around abruptly, he was relieved to find young Jean approaching instead, who awkwardly apologized for having tried to attack him previously. The boy admitted that his mother had explained everything, confessing how remorseful he felt for jumping to reckless conclusions, before sharing that Ichika did not seem bothered by the harsh words spoken that night. Jean recalled how Ichika had resiliently declared that she was still alive despite it all, prompting a surge of shock from him as he realized she was fully aware of what he had said. Frozen in place, he absorbed the heavy truth of her reaction, his eyes wide with disbelief and lingering guilt. Breaking the heavy silence, Jean expressed his admiration for Ichika's unexpected strength and sincerely requested that he remain a supportive friend to her. Before he could fully process the request, the boy brightened up and eagerly asked if he could invite Ichika over to play at his house instead. His face lit up with pure excitement as he shouted his gratitude, while Ryutaro couldn't help but quietly question whether he had just made a terrible mistake. At the dining table, young Ichika candidly admits that the meal tastes bad. Taken aback, Ryutaro stammers a quick apology for his poor cooking. He gently encourages her to endure it just for today, reminding her that her mother is away at a wedding party and will return tomorrow. Later that evening, he stands in the doorway of her bedroom, softly wishing her a good night. She hesitantly mentions that her mother's bed is empty, but he reassures her that everything is fine and that he will sleep in his own room. After he asks if she can manage sleeping alone, the young girl pulls the covers over herself and quietly assures him she can. Hours later, she emerges from her room into the pitch-black, silent living area. Navigating the shadowy hallway, fear grips her as the empty house feels daunting and quiet. She stops directly outside a closed bedroom door, reaching for the handle in the darkness. Opening the door, she startles Ryutaro inside, innocently remarking that his room is smaller than she expected. Looking up at him with wide eyes, she stands in the doorway while he gently asks if she is having trouble sleeping. She sat on the bed beside Ryutaro, asking if she could sleep in her father's room for the night. Snuggled tightly beneath the heavy blanket, she softly asked him to tell her a story, addressing him as her father. Caught off guard, he scrambled for words, wondering why she had asked so suddenly and what kind of tale he could possibly tell. She quickly chimed in, pleading for the story of the magic lamp, declaring how much she loved that classic tale. Later, as he walked alone along the quiet street near the overpass, he pondered how Hikari had managed to break such heavy news to her, that she had come so close to losing her only chance to live. His chest tightened as he realized she was not the type of child to openly express her pain. He worried that beneath her quiet composure, she was suffering terribly on the inside without anyone ever knowing. Driven by a surge of anxiety, he broke into a full sprint through the streets, rushing all the way back to the building until he stood breathing heavily at the end of the apartment hallway. Standing outside her door, his heart pounded against his ribs as he hesitated, suspecting she might already be asleep. Though he desperately wanted to talk to her, he was torn by uncertainty over what to say or if she would even be receptive. Stepping inside quietly, he watched over her as she lay fast asleep in bed, taking a seat beside her to keep a gentle vigil through the night. In her dreams, memories of her father surfaced, how she would fondly ask him for another story instead of a simple pat on the head, holding close his loving promise that she was his entire world above all else. Morning arrived abruptly, and the loud chime of his phone alarm shocked him awake, causing him to sit up in disbelief that the night had already slipped away. Sitting up in the quiet morning light, he checked his phone while resting on the edge of his bed, deep in thought after staying vigilant through the entire night. Nearby, Ichika remained fast asleep beneath her blankets, her breathing soft and peaceful. As he looked down at her sleeping form, his mind drifted back to a story about a magic lamp he had once shared with her when she was little. In that tale, rubbing the lamp summoned a genie willing to grant 3 wishes, though 2 strict prohibitions existed, the first being that no wish could ever bring back the dead. Glancing down at his screen once more, he recalled the second restriction that bound such absolute power. Elsewhere, Jean and Ichika strolled together down a neighborhood street, casually chatting about naming ideas as they walked. Jean inquired how her meeting with her parent and Mr. Agino had gone, but she casually dismissed it, admitting she had simply walked out since she had nothing to say. Upon arriving outside her home, a lively woman with glasses called out to welcome Ichika and politely offered to buy them some cake, leaving Jean flustered as he tried to figure out what to choose. When Jean asked if the youthful woman was her older sister, Ichika nonchalantly revealed that she was actually her mother, who cheerfully invited Jean to come inside and feel right at home. As Jean checked his phone and excitedly announced the arrival of a new riddle, Ichika's countenance suddenly darkened, her eyes clouding over with a grim, troubled look. She stared along with her companions at the strange riddle appearing on the screen, which prompted the user to swipe and rub a virtual lamp to discover what magic could never change. Puzzled by the prompt, the young boy and his companion leaned in closer, questioning what it could possibly mean by asking them to rub the image. Meanwhile, back at the family residence, her mother sat across from Agino, politely explaining that the girl was currently staying over at a friend's home. He acknowledged that her attendance was no longer a concern since it had actually been improving, but expressed that another delicate matter remained on his mind. Hearing this, the mother gently inquired if his visit pertained to one of her daughter's school friends, mentioning Hikari specifically. As the teacher noted that making friends was generally a positive step, she quickly intervened to clarify a crucial detail. Hikari was in fact a boy. The revelation caused him to hesitate before delicately asking whether her family had already conducted that particular discussion at home. He went on to explain that while physical education and health classes cover basic biological facts, proper guidance on personal boundaries and relationships must come from parents. Her face instantly flushed deep red as the true implication of his cautious phrasing hit her, leaving her utterly mortified and stammering in disbelief. Elsewhere, oblivious to the misunderstanding, the dark-haired girl sat across from Reitaro, completely stunned by how rapidly he had managed to decipher the riddle's hidden sequence. He was absent from the room, while young Jean enthusiastically explained his ideal wishes, starting with a grand desire for world peace before asking Ichika what she would request if given 3 wishes. Surprised by his own logic, the energetic boy reasoned that he should hold onto his remaining 2 wishes until he encountered real trouble. Curious, the boy asked what her choice would be, to which she calmly responded that she would simply wish for them to be friends forever. Laughing off her serious answer, he insisted that a magical wish was hardly necessary for something so certain, leaving her to quietly process his words. Their quiet conversation was interrupted when Senko stepped into the room carrying groceries, cheerfully greeting them and asking if she had arrived home a bit too early. Meanwhile, Mr. Ajino cautioned Ichika's mother that at this delicate age, parents needed to remain vigilant about their children's growing interest in the opposite sex before it became too late. He went on to explain how adolescent struggles often stem from strained family dynamics or a breakdown in communication, leaving the flustered mother struggling to articulate her thoughts. She listened in silent realization as the implications sank in, that the deteriorating relationship between husband and wife could directly impact her daughter's well-being. Opening up about her home life, she admitted that she and her husband had been estranged ever since Ichika's birth, openly questioning how much control parents could truly exert over their children's private lives. Faced with her blunt honesty, the educator wiped away a bead of sweat, realizing he had stumbled into a delicate family matter while trying to explain the profound influence parents hold. He hastily retracted his statement before elaborating further, leaving the woman bewildered by his sudden shift in tone. Following that brief exchange, he politely took his leave, asking her to remind her daughter to focus strictly on her studies rather than romantic affairs while the children walked up the path outside. Left alone with her thoughts, she was forced to mull over the heavy weight of his words, reflecting on how easily parents can impose their own emotional expectations on their children without realizing the harm it causes. Throughout their conversation at the table, he had firmly insisted that young girls must view romantic involvement with boys as inherently problematic. Meanwhile, back with the group, Senko playfully rattled off a dramatic list of extravagant wishes: wealth, fame, eternal youth, and endless beauty, prompting the young boy to point out that she had listed 4 desires instead of 3. Their conversation recalled the classic lore of genie lamps, which strictly dictates that while 3 wishes may be granted, certain fundamental boundaries, such as resurrecting the dead, can never be breached. Staring quietly at her phone screen where the second forbidden rule was displayed, Ichika realized with a heavy heart that if those limitations held true, her deepest, unspoken wishes would remain forever unfulfilled. Preparing to take his leave, the teacher offered a polite farewell, assuring the mother that she could reach out if any further questions arose. He added that his guidance extended beyond just her daughter's academic concerns, prompting a deeply grateful response from her. As he strode down the outdoor corridor, she remained standing at the doorway, quietly watching his receding figure. She bristled internally, annoyed by his subtle patronizing tone and dramatic overthinking regarding her daughter's social development. Meanwhile, outside the tranquil apartment building, a light-hearted conversation echoed from within one of the residences. Inside, the young boy enthusiastically shared trivia about calico cats, complimenting the quiet girl's surprising wit whenever she spoke. She promptly interjected with unblinking precision, noting that a male calico occurs in only 1 out of every 30,000 births. She then quietly rose from her seat and headed toward the hallway, as the woman with glasses kindly pointed out the location of the restroom. Watching her step away, the woman with glasses remarked on how wonderful it was that she had made a friend so quickly after moving, to which the boy offered a tentative nod. Near the doorway, the quiet girl lingered with an unsettling expression, prompting the woman with glasses to call out and check if she needed anything. She stood in the doorway, voice trembling as she admitted to seeing blood for the very first time, prompting the older woman to instantly recognize what was happening. Confused by the sudden shift in mood, the young girl could only utter a bewildered response as her companion warmly offered her congratulations. Questioning whether this unexpected development was truly something to celebrate, she hesitated, but her guardian immediately took charge, instructing her to wait while taking care of her soiled garments and bringing fresh underwear. The older woman went on to explain that from this point forward, she would experience physical discomfort and troubling moments even without being sick, yet emphasized that it remained a vital milestone for every girl. Reassuring the young girl further, she promised that sooner or later, after working through those difficult days, a deep sense of gratitude for being born female would surely follow. With a radiant smile framing her face, Her mentor reaffirmed her joy, offering congratulations straight from the bottom of her heart. The girl simply stared in stunned silence, processing the overwhelming outpouring of emotion with a blank, wide-eyed gaze. Turning back toward the living room, the woman casually dismissed the young boy's curiosity as private matters, strictly ordering him to be gentler and more considerate of his companion from that day on. Later on, she walked down the quiet hallway of her home, stepping into the room where her mother sat absorbed in her phone. Stepping up to her mother with absolute straightforwardness, she quietly announced that her period had just arrived, leaving the woman momentarily caught off guard. She sat across from her mother at the dining table, silently finishing her meal following her blunt confession. Her mother stared back in wide-eyed shock and disbelief, while she maintained her usual blank, stoic expression. She brought her hands together to offer thanks for the food, prompting her mother to gently suggest checking her teeth as part of their routine. Lying back on the floor, she opened her mouth while her mother carefully inspected her teeth, praising her for keeping them clean and cavity-free. As her mother continued the dental checkup, she began delivering a lecture on the dangers of letting one's guard down in other people's homes, explaining that her trust was the only reason sleepovers were permitted. Her mother's tone quickly turned emotional as tears welled up in her eyes, tearfully demanding to know why she had lied about Reitaro being a boy and allowed him to stay over. She remained completely silent with her mouth held wide open, unable to speak while the mirror remained wedged inside her mouth. Their uncomfortable moment was interrupted by a knock at the front door, leading her mother to answer it with a dark, stern countenance as Senko arrived. Stepping inside, she greeted both mother and daughter with a bright, cheerful evening salutation. Recognizing her visitor from their previous meeting at the park, her mother flushed with intense embarrassment upon realizing she had blurted out private details to an adult acquaintance. She greeted Senko warmly, explaining that she knew her from the parent-teacher conference after Reitaro moved in and wanted to express her gratitude for taking care of Ichika. Interrupting their conversation, Reitaro warmly greeted Ichika before introducing himself politely to her mother. Before he could say more, the mother dropped a sudden bombshell, confessing that she wanted Reitaro and Ichika to stop spending time together from now on. Flustered by the awkward atmosphere, she went on to explain that their homeroom teacher, Mr. Ajino, had visited her home with concerning warnings about opposite-sex interactions at their age. Hearing this elaborate excuse, Senko calmly questioned whether the teacher had actually specified any genuine wrongdoing or if the mother had simply misconstrued his intent. Feeling pressed by the sharp questioning, the mother grew defensive, insisting she was only trying to protect her daughter as her sole guardian. Unmoved by her emotional plea, Senko pointed out that Ichika's father had already given permission for her visits, questioning why she was getting so worked up over nothing. Shaken by the counterargument, the mother declared she would verify everything with Ichika's father and Mr. Ajino, but strictly forbade any further contact in the meantime. Taking hold of her daughter to depart, she was caught off guard when Senko asked if they were going to celebrate, leaving her bewildered. As she was led away into the night, Reitaro could only call out her name in dismay, helpless to stop her departure. He remained the central concern of an abrupt telephone call, as a man standing at a busy station answered his phone only to be grilled about Ichika's companion and how deeply he actually knew the boy. Hearing his wife demand confirmation about allowing the young man to invite Ichika over, the father admitted he had given his consent, prompting immediate criticism for his decision. Sensing the severe tone on the line, he braced himself, asking what could possibly be wrong to warrant such hostility. He tried to defend the boy, arguing that despite being a handful, the youth possessed a strong sense of justice and was a good friend for Ichika, but his wife cut him off, accusing him of being irresponsible toward their daughter. Before he could offer any further defense, she declared it wasn't worth speaking to him any longer and abruptly hung up, leaving him calling out Kazumi's name in frustration. Staring at his phone in disbelief, he wondered in silence whether something alarming had truly transpired between Ichika and her friend. Pondering his next move, he debated calling Miss Shinoya to see if she had any insight into the situation, but before he could make a decision, an incoming alert interrupted his thoughts. Looking down at the screen, he read a message from Sayako, warning him that his wife had just arrived at her house with Ichika and reassuring him that the young man had done nothing wrong. Meanwhile, back at home, The mother dismissed her husband entirely as unreliable while sitting at the table, leaving him standing silently in the background. Overwhelmed by anxiety, she stared ahead with wide, distressed eyes, consumed by the terrifying belief that she was the only person in the family genuinely concerned for her daughter's well-being. As she entered the bedroom to check on her daughter, Ichika lay quietly beneath her blanket, staring at her glowing phone screen. Stepping closer to sit on the edge of the bed, the mother softly spoke her daughter's name into the quiet space. Because of her internal turmoil, Ichika offered no response, keeping her eyes closed and hiding deeper beneath the covers. Noticing her silence, the mother looked down with a heavy heart, while Ichika peeked back up at her, sensing the overwhelming grief in the room. Unable to hold back her bitterness any longer, the mother unleashed a long tirade, condemning Ichika's father as an irresponsible man and insisting that men only pretend to care while causing devastation. While her mother ranted, Ichika silently tapped her phone beneath the blanket, engaging with a mysterious riddle application that spoke of magical lamps and unchangeable truths. In response to her mother's harsh words, Ichika's eyes narrowed with firm resolve, deciding that no matter what was said, her loyalty to Reitaro would remain unchanged. A few days later, Reitaro stood outside after school in bewilderment, staring at his phone as he realized Ichika had not returned home. As worry mounted, he thought back to the sweet moments they had shared, walking hand in hand through the city. Amidst the growing uncertainty, a dark and unsettling thought echoed in the air. If a family brings only suffering, perhaps abandoning it is the only option left. Frustration boiled over inside the household as a loud crash echoed through the quiet neighborhood, accompanied by a furious outburst. Prompted by the sudden commotion, Sayako burst into the room, gasping for breath as she demanded to know what was driving Hikari to such extreme anger. Instead of calming down, he continued to lash out in fury, kicking over furniture and shouting about how unfair everything felt, utterly baffled by why he was being blamed. Unable to watch the destruction any longer, she restrained him in a firm headlock, sternly warning him to stop wrecking the house, while he squirmed and yelled to be released. Breaking free from her grip with a sharp cry, he darted out the front door and sprinted into the street, leaving the room behind. Standing at the entryway, she sighed in resignation, realizing she had no hope of outrunning him and rationalizing that hunger would eventually bring him back home anyway. The lingering tension had built up ever since Ichika's mother visited to discuss recent developments, leaving Hikari in a constant state of bitter resentment. Meanwhile, walking along the city pavement, Ichika's father placed a sudden call to Sayako to inquire about his daughter's whereabouts. She was caught completely off guard when he asked directly if Ichika was currently staying over at her apartment. Surprised, she clarified that Ichika wasn't there and asked what was wrong, prompting him to explain that his wife had reported their daughter missing, having assumed she would be with Hikari. She hurried down the street, urgently pressing her phone to her ear as she coordinated with Ichika's father, confirming that the young girl had not returned home while checking if anyone had searched the local library. Frustrated by the lack of progress, she attempted to reach Reitaro directly, but her calls went unanswered, leaving her to anxiously wonder whether he possessed any clue about Ichika's whereabouts or if something far worse had happened. At that very moment, Reitaro was already inquiring at the library counter, only for the clerk to check the logs and confirm that Ichika had not set foot inside the building all day. Turning away from the desk in disappointment, he bumped directly into Sayako, who was surprised to see him searching for the missing girl in the exact same location. As they walked through the hall together, she explained that she had already biked across the area, checking convenience stores and family restaurants to no avail, pressing him for any other places where Ichika might go. Her questions weighed heavily on him, bringing to mind the heartbreaking words of Ichika's father, who had confessed his own sense of failure and gratitude toward Reitaro for helping his daughter return to school in the first place. An unsettling realization gripped him as he realized he had overlooked the root cause, powerlessly aware that the core issue behind her original refusal to attend school was still unresolved. Breaking his grim silence, she pointed out how unusual it was for Ichika not to send a simple message, noting that despite the girl's reserved nature, complete silence was deeply out of character. Her words struck a raw nerve, causing his eyes to widen in sudden shock as a terrifying doubt took root in his mind. When she gently probed into how he determined the difficulty of the cryptic riddles he left for Ichika, he stammered in uncertainty, suddenly forced to confront a truth he had never fully considered. He listened as she pointed out the logical truth behind his riddles. A puzzle is meant to be solved, not rendered impossible to decipher. Still uncertain about the mysterious message, he admitted that involving the police might be their best option if she was in serious trouble. Turning to him as they walked, she asked if he had been on his way home from work when everything began. Her simple question struck a chord within him, bringing back the memory of receiving his wife's urgent phone call that launched his search. A sudden spark of intuition caught him off guard as he realized there was still one specific location he had overlooked. Catching on to his sudden epiphany, she enthusiastically agreed, suggesting the missing girl was almost certainly at the place his wife would never think to check. Meanwhile, the quiet expanse of the high school building stood silently under the afternoon sky. Outside the faculty room, students moved along the corridor while a worried mother approached the entrance in search of help. Introducing herself to the vice principal, the distraught mother hurriedly requested to speak with Mr. Agino, the homeroom teacher for class 1 to 2. She confessed her overwhelming worry over her daughter's failure to return home, while the teacher puzzled over the situation, noting that the girl was not involved in any after-school clubs. She approached the teacher in the hallway, calling out to Mr. Agino as he turned to greet her warmly. As they stepped into the quiet classroom, he pointed out that Ichika was nowhere to be found among the empty desks. Continuing down the corridor, the teacher explained that the girl usually avoided crowded areas, often seeking quiet corners like the stairwell landing or playing with a stray cat behind the building. Upon reaching the entrance lockers, a quick check confirmed their fears. Her shoebox was entirely empty, proving she had already left the grounds. Stopping near the school aquarium, Mr. Agino recalled seeing her earlier while she was assigned to clean the fish tank, noting how exhausted she appeared before likely heading home early. Deeply touched by his genuine care, she bowed her head in heartfelt gratitude, thanking him for constantly looking after her daughter. Suddenly, an idea struck the teacher, and he suggested contacting Karashiki to check if the missing girl might have visited Ryutaro's place instead. The suggestion caught her off guard, her eyes widening as the realistic possibility sank in. Promptly dialing the number from the staff room, Mr. Agino reached the household, only to be informed that Ryutaro was currently out. Overhearing the conversation, she pressed closer in desperation, urgently asking if her daughter had come over to their house once again. Overwhelmed by anxiety, she snatched the telephone receiver straight from the teacher's hand, demanding to know where her daughter was being hidden after the caller claimed Ichika was not there. Realizing her outburst, she stepped back with an apology while the teacher politely asked her to wait until he concluded the call. After exchanging brief, polite apologies with the person on the line, the teacher finally hung up the phone and turned his attention back to her. Refusing to accept the response from the caller, she insisted with firm conviction that the answer was a lie, convinced her daughter was indeed hiding at Ryutaro's home. Shifting the subject, she brought up a lingering question from her previous visit, inquiring specifically about the purpose of the adhesive tape laid along the school hallway. Her inquiry hung in the air, bringing attention to the strange strip of tape securing the floor seam. Meanwhile, across town, Ryutaro quietly unlocked his apartment door and stepped inside after returning from his outing. Removing his shoes, he gently slid open the door to his inner room, cautious not to make a sound. Inside, he discovered Ichika lying motionless on the bed in her school uniform, her shoes placed neatly beside the frame. As he looked down at her quiet form, her eyes opened to meet his gaze as he softly uttered her name. She lay quietly on the bed, insisting to Ryutaro that she had not gone anywhere and that her mother had simply misunderstood the situation once again. Ryutaro expressed his genuine worry, explaining that her mother had called him frantic over her late absence, leading him to fear she had actually gone missing. Reflecting quietly on the matter, she noted that she had never spoken a word about Hikari's gender, yet her mother jumped to conclusions anyway. In the end, despite never lying, she found herself unfairly blamed for deceit. Relief washed over Ichika's mother as the voice on the phone confirmed the girl had been inside the house all along. She explained her earlier confusion, admitting that the absence of shoes at the entrance had led her to assume the worst, while the teacher offered his apologies for the entire misunderstanding. He watched her intently, reflecting on how her seemingly scatterbrained persistence had somehow led to the correct conclusion. His gentle admiration grew as he quietly found her earnest behavior endearing. He attempted to dismiss the tape on the floor as a simple marker that the girl had likely overlooked, but she remained skeptical about its true significance. She pressed him further, asking who could have placed such a boundary inside the house in the first place, forcing him to reluctantly confess that it had been his doing. He wilted under her sharp, probing gaze as she quietly asked if any of those excuses truly mattered. She brought the conversation to a polite close, thanking him for his time and offering to stay in touch should any further issues arise. Meanwhile, under the dim illumination of streetlights outside a quiet apartment complex, a mobile phone chimed with an incoming call from Reitaro. She answered the call to deliver the long-awaited news, expressing her deep gratitude upon confirming that Ichika had finally been located safely. She finished wrapping up her phone call, offering a gentle reminder not to be too harsh on Ichika now that the girl was safe, though a small lingering question remained about where Reitaro had gone. As she stepped outside, the young man arrived back at the building, prompting a warm greeting from her as she noticed his return. Without a single word, he brushed past her into the doorway, his quiet demeanor immediately cutting her greeting short. Outraged by his cold indifference, her frustrated shouts echoed through the quiet neighborhood outside the apartment complex. Meanwhile, back inside, Ichika lay quietly on the bed, silently harboring frustration toward her mother's persistent fretting. Joining her in the room, Reitaro sat beside the bed to speak gently with her, urging her not to dismiss her mother's care or cause such alarm again. Softening his gaze, he explained how much she truly meant to both of them, emphasizing that she was the single most precious person in their lives. Recalling the past, he shared the bittersweet memory of learning about her upcoming birth, how initial pure joy was quickly overshadowed by severe health complications that nearly drove him to make a painful choice. While she listened intently, he revealed how her mother had stubbornly refused to give up, sacrificing her own dream career to bring her into the world, a choice he remained deeply grateful for. With earnest conviction, he concluded his heartfelt talk by reminding her that her mother had willingly risked her own life so that Ichika could live. He listens quietly as the young girl lies down, asking if she can take a break from school and rest in his room for a while. Surprised by her sudden request for another break, he turns to her as she asks to stay in his apartment for the time being. Softening his tone, he agrees to her request, giving her the quiet space she desperately needs. Before they can discuss it further, the front door bursts open with a loud clatter, abruptly interrupting the calm. He looks up in shock as Kazumi stands at the threshold, breathless and visibly frantic, demandingly asking where her daughter is. Kazumi becomes furious when he suggests leaving her alone, arguing how deeply worried she has been. In response, he silently wonders why a daughter would feel forced to go so far as to deceive her own parents. Kazumi insists that the girl explained everything, asserting that her daughter never lied, and claiming he was the one who misconstrued the entire situation. Holding his ground, he prepares to confront her with the harsh truth behind her daughter's silence. He plainly points out that her daughter is lying in deep sorrow, utterly heartbroken because her own mother believes she is a liar. She sat in quiet solitude on the edge of the bed, staring blankly into the quiet room. As her gaze drifted toward the nearby desk, a small, oddly shaped object resting beside the computer monitor caught her attention. Reaching out to pick it up, she turned the item over in her hands, wondering if it was merely a strangely contoured paperweight. Meanwhile, back in the hallway, Kazumi defensively countered Ryutaro's words, insisting that Ichika had never spoken a single word about her troubles, leaving her with no way of knowing how her daughter felt. When Kazumi demanded to know how she could possibly understand without being told, he maintained his composure, suggesting that while Ichika struggled to voice her feelings, she may have already left subtle messages that they simply had failed to comprehend. Although he privately acknowledged the truth in Kazumi's argument that unspoken thoughts remain unknown, a grim, chilling sensation began to take root in his chest as he reflected on the situation. Escorting her toward the door, he voiced his bleak conclusion that words were ultimately limited, believing that no amount of conversation could bring true understanding between two people if the emotional disconnect ran too deep. Disheartened by his icy demeanor, she turned back with a look of shocked resignation, realizing that further argument with him was entirely pointless. But as she prepared to leave, a sudden shock struck him, his eyes widening as a critical memory flashed across his mind. He recalled a moment when Ichika had spoken with her father, remembering how she had offered to sleep in his room despite its hard, uncomfortable bed, putting her father's comfort above her own without complaining. She listened as he offered her his bed and bade her good night, though he nervously stammered, asking if he could at least retrieve his pillow before heading out. After settling down in the hallway, he reasoned that it was fortunate the cold season had not yet arrived, only for her to suddenly step out and command him to come back inside and sleep properly in the room. Reluctantly obeying her command, he lay awake on one of the twin beds staring up at the ceiling, while she lay silently tucked under the blankets on the adjacent bed. In the quiet darkness, distant memories bubbled up of her father questioning the strange warning signs posted around their house, accompanied by the quiet sound of soft, muffled hiccups. Turning his gaze toward her bed, he was pierced by the realization that she was softly whimpering into her pillow, holding back tears in the night. A heavy silhouette of her figure loomed in his mind, shrouded in the weight of unexpressed sorrow and lingering past memories. The recollection shifted to a serene afternoon on the water, where they had once shared a peaceful moment together rowing a boat across a quiet lake. Holding a flat, diamond-shaped object, a solitary hand recalled words about the futility of dialogue, reflecting quietly on the distant figure of a father. Rotating the object reveals a sharp, triangular face, turning thoughts toward a mother and the persistent sense that understanding remained frustratingly out of reach. Viewed from yet another angle, the strange item appears entirely smooth and circular, mirroring the young girl's realization about her own place within the family dynamic. Examining the unusual paperweight closely, Ichika observed how its appearance shifted dramatically depending on how one looked at it, musing over its baffling geometry. Later, sitting quietly on the edge of her bed with her phone in hand, she sent a brief message promising to deliver her final answer once school had finished for the day. Early the next morning, as she cracked open her bedroom door, she accidentally bumped into Reitaro, who was sleeping right outside on the floor, and hastily scrambled to move out of her way. Standing up in the hallway and stretching lazily, he offered a drowsy good morning, though a sudden wave of confusion began to cloud his memory of the previous night. He clearly remembered Kazumi standing at the doorway the night before, questioning why he was sleeping out in the hall and insisting that he come inside the bedroom to rest properly. In his memory, he had acceded to Kazumi's request and laid down on the floor right beside Ichika's bed while her mother slept peacefully under the covers. Touching his cheek in utter bewilderment, Reitaro wondered if those vivid events had actually occurred or if the entire encounter had merely been a vivid dream. He offered a gentle suggestion, encouraging her to get some breakfast and reassuring her that she could remain in his room for as long as she needed. Without a word in response, she slowly stepped backward into the room and clicked the door shut, leaving him standing outside in stunned silence. Across the house, Kazumi pushed herself up in bed, letting out a weary sigh as she checked her phone, astonished by how late the morning had already become. Her mind was heavy with exhaustion after a night spent tossing and turning beneath the blankets, completely unable to settle into a deep slumber. Disturbing memories from the darkness returned to her, reminding her of the moment she had awakened to find a silhouette resting beside her bed. In that quiet hour, she had opened her eyes to discover a figure leaning ominously over her, causing her heart to surge with sudden panic. The terrifying impression that Reitaro had been looming directly over her in the middle of the night had left her thoroughly shaken. She vividly recalled the soft patter of footsteps retreating down the dark hallway before the door had shut with a quiet thud. Now sitting alone in the bright morning light, she stared intently at the vacant floor, struggling to discern whether the night's encounter had been a nightmare or reality. Resting her hand upon the edge of the mattress where the intruder had been, she pondered the lingering presence in the quiet room. Her gaze remains wide and fixed as she processes the unsettling thoughts lingering in her mind. Stepping out into the hallway, she approaches Reitaro, urgently asking where Ichika has gone. Reitaro clarifies that the young girl is resting in his room, having mentioned that she needed a temporary break from attending school. He further explains that although he urged her to have breakfast, she seemed unwell and lacked any appetite. Unconvinced, Kazumi questions whether her daughter is truly ill or simply avoiding her duties, demanding that Reitaro instruct her to prepare for class immediately. When Kazumi demands a concrete reason for the sudden absence, Reitaro stammers a defense, pleading that they shouldn't force her when she clearly has a valid reason for staying behind. Inside the quiet bedroom, Ichika sits motionless on the edge of the bed, isolated with her unspoken burdens. Back in the hallway, Reitaro acknowledges that while Ichika hasn't opened up about what is troubling her, he feels certain that something serious is wrong. With a dark and intense look, he warns of the dire consequences of pushing her too far, raising the haunting possibility that continuing to force her to school might cause her to run away forever. He confronts the parent directly with a harsh and challenging question, asking how anyone could claim to be a proper guardian while ignoring her distress. His unwavering stance only enraged her further, prompting a desperate, furious outburst as she screamed that a true parent would do whatever it took, even using force, to make the child go to school. From inside her dark room, the young girl overheard every harsh word echoing down the hallway. Standing before her without flinching, he maintained his quiet composure as her sudden outburst burned itself out, leaving her with her head bowed in silent frustration. He calmly explained that as a child he had suffered through similar pressure, firmly refusing to inflict that kind of pain on anyone else. Defeated by his earnest conviction, she finally relented, muttering softly that she understood and would handle contacting the school herself. Seeing that the matter was resolved, he softly announced his departure and turned to go, while she stepped back into her room, completely drained from the exchange. As the front door clicked shut behind him, the apartment fell into a heavy stillness, leaving the young girl sitting quietly on her bed, listening to the silence. Still seated near her desk, she paused as a faint sound caught her attention, wondering if her mother was whimpering in the outer hallway. In the living area, the mother stood trembling against the table, visibly shaken by the encounter before dragging herself slowly toward her desk. Sitting down in tears, she tried desperately to compose her trembling voice before placing the call to the school, haunted by the realization of her own harsh demands. Outside, as he waited by the exit, she felt a profound wave of relief wash over her, deeply moved that he had steadfastly refused to treat her daughter with violence. Painful memories of her own past came crashing back, recalling with a shudder how her own father would have beaten her senseless for merely asking for a brief break from school. She wiped her eyes, knowing she had to act quickly as Ichika's class was about to begin, and dialed the school's number. Reaching out to the administration, she composed her voice to explain that she was calling on behalf of her daughter, Ichika, requesting time off from her second-year class. As her voice faltered mid-sentence, Mr. Ajino took over the call on the other end, expressing concern at her distress and asking if everything was all right. Hearing that she wanted Ichika to take a temporary break, he acknowledged the request sympathetically and suggested she come to the school after classes for a face-to-face consultation. Later that afternoon, young Jean visited the art room to ask the club members if they had any spare clay he could borrow for a personal task. He brightly explained his request, hoping to secure enough material for what he had planned. After thanking the club members and heading down the hallway, he noticed Mr. Ajino walking alongside Ichika's mother. Meanwhile, back at the apartment building, the afternoon turned quiet. Miss Shinoya opened her door to find Ichika outside tending to a stray cat in a cardboard box, gently letting the young girl know that Reitaro would be delayed and inviting her inside. Inside the art room, a young student challenged his classmates with a geometric puzzle, asking them to deduce a shape that appeared triangular from the front, quadrilateral from the side, and circular from below. Demonstrating the solution step by step, he reshaped a piece of clay into a cylinder, flattened one edge to form a trapezoid, and trimmed the sides until the intricate form matched his description. Having completed the figure to the admiration of the girls watching, he proudly announced that the craft was finished. Snapping a quick photograph of the clay creation on his smartphone, he promptly sent the image to Ichika while his classmate teasingly brushed off the achievement as simple. Meanwhile, in the school hallway, Hikari walked alongside a teacher who expressed his gratitude for her family's contribution of clay to the classroom. As they paused near the art room, the educator shifted the conversation to ask how Ichika was faring at home and whether her parents had attempted to talk with her regarding her recent behavior. Seated inside a quiet office, she admitted with concern that maintaining a meaningful conversation with her daughter had become increasingly difficult. Warned by the teacher that Ichika's attendance would continue to drop without intervention, she listened as he suggested scheduling weekly counselor sessions and enrolling the girl in a support class following an evaluation. She questioned the necessity of testing her daughter's intelligence, recalling that Ichika had always excelled academically throughout elementary school and possessed a deep fondness for reading. Looking out at the students playing in the courtyard, the teacher clarified that while Ichika indeed spent her break time reading, the material she was consuming had subtly shifted away from ordinary books. The word dictionaries hung heavily in the air between them, leaving Hikari struggling to comprehend what the teacher was implying about her daughter's behavior. Realizing what this meant, she felt a pit form in her stomach as she understood that Ichika spent her breaks entirely isolated from her peers, absorbed in reference books rather than conversing with anyone. Recalling her own school years, she remembered how she had always sought out groups of friends during recess, choosing social connection even when things at school were far from ideal. She pictured her daughter sitting alone in a bustling classroom, head bowed over thick volumes while other girls gathered in cheerful circles, wondering how Ichika could ever form friendships with such habits. Across the table, the counselor observed her spiraling thoughts, recognizing the familiar pattern of her jumping straight to negative assumptions. As she sat with her head lowered in despair, he silently noted how a single detail was all it took for her to construct an elaborate, agonizing narrative about her child's misery. Unable to contain her anxiety, she began rationalizing aloud, questioning whether reading dictionaries was merely a desperate coping strategy to kill time rather than a genuine interest, while the counselor internally lamented her inclination to wallow in self-pity. He silently judged her narrow perspective, viewing her catastrophic thinking as a reflection of a strained marital life and a refusal to empathize with anything beyond her rigid definition of normal. Breaking the heavy silence, he directly challenged her by asking why she didn't take charge of the situation herself this time. Catching her completely off guard, he elaborated that before addressing support classes, she needed to repair the atmosphere in her own household, pointedly asking whether she and her husband had been spending any quality time together lately. His direct inquiry leaves her bewildered, as she stammers that her husband seems to have no intention of talking things through or spending time together. In response, he challenges her, asking why she does not take the initiative to invite him instead of waiting, leaving her speechless as she ponders his true meaning. She stares back in stunned silence, processing the blunt weight of his words. Heat rises to her cheeks as embarrassment and quiet frustration wash over her face. Unfazed, he presses further, explaining that even if it feels uncomfortable, taking these steps is essential if she truly desires a normal life for her daughter. Sitting across from her, he suggests focusing on building a normal family dynamic first, while privately thinking to himself how hopeless her situation seems. Meanwhile, outside an apartment building, Ichika stares down at her phone as a notification confirms a puzzle has been solved. Sitting together at a table, Sawako adjusts her glasses and confirms the correct solution with a gentle smile. When asked where she obtained the item in her hands, Ichika quietly reveals it came from her father's room, noting that she had intended to show it to Hikari. Examining the object from Ryutaro's room, Sawako muses out loud on how different people interpret the same shape, wondering if a hidden message lies within it. She watched intently as the young girl cradled the small, geometric object in her hands, listening as Ichika pondered aloud about what its shape might represent. Realizing that her young companion was on the verge of expressing something deeply profound, her eyes widened behind her glasses as she prepared to listen closely. A quiet pause settled over the room as both of them sat at the low table, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation for what was to be said next. Lowering her gaze, the girl fixed her dark eyes on the object, quietly assembling her thoughts before speaking. She began to explain her philosophy, stating that no matter how much or how long two people talk, simple dialogue is never enough to grant complete mutual understanding. prompting a surprised reaction from her listener. Elaborating further, she reasoned that because no two individuals are identical, their mindsets can never fully align. Yet, if they look beyond their surface differences, they might find common ground that transcends the need for spoken words. This perspective evoked memories of past conversations, where an exasperated voice had once declared that speaking was entirely pointless, seeing only one rigid angle of their troubled dynamic. Looking at the object from a different angle revealed a completely new face, demonstrating how shifting one's viewpoint can drastically change how a shared reality is perceived. It reflected how another person, trapped in their own disappointment, might conclude that communication had lost all value once they believed their effort was in vain. Cradling the geometric piece tenderly in her hands, the young girl concluded that this complex, multifaceted shape perfectly reflected the current state of her own family. She listened quietly as Sawako expressed her gratitude for opening up, though the older woman couldn't help but marvel internally at how remarkably mature such reflections were for a child her age. Behind that quiet and composed demeanor, Sawako recognized the tragic truth. The young girl still held on to the earnest belief that one day her parents could resolve their bitter conflict. Offering a gentle, reassuring smile, Sawako reminded her that she was still young, gently advising that it was perfectly fine to step away from adult burdens and focus on herself. Their delicate conversation was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening as Kazumi returned home, prompting Sawako to stand and greet him warmly while the young girl watched on. As her mother welcomed him back, the young girl squeezed the multifaceted object tightly in her hand, her gaze blank yet heavy with silent emotion. Night fell quietly over the residential complex, shrouding the building in a calm yet suffocating darkness. Inside, Kazumi was curled up on a small floor mat in the hallway until Hikari opened the bedroom door, softly asking why he was trying to sleep outside and urging him to come inside. Though he agreed to sleep in the same room beside her, sleep offered no comfort as he lay tense in the dark, overwhelmed by inner turmoil. A crushing wave of distress suddenly overwhelmed him, fracturing his peaceful slumber like shattering glass as painful memories tore through his mind. Gasping for breath, he bolted upright in the dim light, his heart pounding as he turned to check on Hikari sleeping silently beside him. He lay awake in the dim room, heart racing and sweat dripping down his face as lingering anxiety made sleep impossible. Unable to calm his mind, he sat up in bed, moving quietly beside his sleeping wife. Noticing his sudden movement, she stirred awake and sat up beside him, softly asking if something was wrong. In a fond memory from their school days inside the art club, two young girls worked side by side at their desks. One casually asked if her companion was finished, and she replied that she only needed a tiny bit more time. When they both held up their drawings, the dramatic difference between their styles was instantly obvious. One nervously presented a simplified, adorable chibi drawing while apologizing for the lack of resemblance, whereas her friend displayed a shockingly realistic portrait. Next, they instructed a male classmate to stand completely still as their new model, cautioning him not to move an inch, while one of the girls fretted over how difficult the challenge would be. Moments later, both girls proudly unveiled their completed works together. Once again, one produced a sweet, basic sketch, while her partner created an impeccably detailed, lifelike portrait. Comparing the two finished pieces, the boy was amazed at how vastly different their artistic abilities were, even as one girl warmly praised how cute her friend's drawing had turned out. Returning home, Kazumi softly announces his presence into the dim entryway, met only by the oppressive silence of a darkened house where the lights have been turned off. An ultrasound scan revealed the soft outline of a growing child, as the doctor confirmed that they were likely expecting a baby girl. Hearing the wonderful news, the expectant mother gasped in disbelief, overwhelmed with surprise and happiness. Looking over at her husband, she admitted she had sensed all along that their baby would be a daughter, her eyes shining with joy. Soon after, they went shopping together for baby clothes, where she excitedly pointed out one adorable outfit after another. Holding up a tiny dress, she eagerly asked for his opinion, though he gently reminded her that it might be a bit too early to buy larger sizes. Concerned for her physical comfort, he asked if she was feeling any pain, but she warmly brushed off his worries and suggested exploring the toys and books section next. A few weeks after those precious preparations, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl named Ichika, arriving slightly ahead of schedule but without any complications. Overwhelmed with emotion, the new father held them close, tearfully praising her strength and expressing endless gratitude for the miracle of their daughter. Looking down at the tiny bundle in her arms, she marveled at how small and adorable the child was, agreeing softly with her husband that their little girl was destined to grow into someone truly wonderful. 2 years passed in a flash, filled with quiet joy as she delighted in styling her daughter's long, dark hair, fussing over braids, buns, and hair clips while declaring her child to be the cutest in the world. As she prepared her daughter for the day, she gently offered choices of ribbon colors, asking whether pink or azure suited her mood best. Stroking the impossibly silky strands, she marveled aloud that the long hair had been growing along with her child since birth, a tangible mark of all their time together. Touching the smooth locks felt almost otherworldly, as if the child's hair served as a quiet thread lingering from the spiritual realm she had inhabited before coming into the world. Holding her close in a warm embrace, she deeply felt that this divine connection was a blessing gifted directly by the gods, forever binding their lives together. The sweet daily routine continued as her husband prepared to depart for work, promising to call if he ran late, while she reminded him to stay safe. Before he left, she gave her daughter a gentle reminder to listen to her father, sharing a final affectionate look as the day began. As she made her way back home from her errand, her young daughter sat quietly at home, playing with her shoes. Noticing the little girl holding her footwear, Kazumi helped her put them on and decided to take her out for a pleasant stroll. Along the neighborhood street, an elderly local woman greeted them cheerfully, delighted to see the little girl. Bending down to chat, the neighbor praised the toddler's cleverness and remarked on how much she shared her father's eyes. Pointing to her hair salon behind them, the woman warmly suggested that hiding such a cute face was a shame and offered to give her a haircut. Later, as Hikari stepped inside announcing her arrival, she met Kazumi and Ichika, whose long dark locks had been neatly trimmed. She stood paralyzed near the entrance, staring silently at her daughter's sudden transformation. Kazumi began offhandedly explaining their outing to the salon, but trailing off as he caught sight of Hikari's overwhelming reaction. Glistening tears rapidly welled up in her wide, trembling eyes. As tears began falling down her cheeks, Kazumi grew flustered and asked in confusion whether she was upset about the haircut. She remained collapsed on the floor in tears, under the unblinking, curious gaze of her young daughter. Before her stood her child and husband, both transfixed in bewildered silence at her sudden emotional breakdown. Later, lying in the quiet of the night, she reflected on her intense reaction, startled by how deeply an old, distant memory could still wound her. Beside her in the dark, her husband lay awake, rationalizing that a haircut was inevitable and hardly worth crying over, yet finally understanding why others had been so bewildered by her state. He suddenly bolted upright in bed, unable to contain his rising frustration over her lack of communication. As he let out a heavy sigh, she turned her head toward him from beneath the blankets, sensing his sudden unrest. Ignoring her silent gaze, he reached over and switched on the bedside lamp, filling the dim bedroom with a sudden glow. Seeing the light click on, she sat up against the headboard and softly asked if something was wrong or if he was having trouble sleeping. He turned his face toward her, his expression heavy with turmoil as he admitted that peace of mind was entirely beyond his reach tonight. With his eyes cast downward and his brow furrowed in distress, he sat in troubled silence, deeply tormented by the growing rift between them. His blunt confrontation stunned her into silence, leaving her staring back at him with wide, trembling eyes. He brought up her glaring contradictions, reminding her how she had thrown a glass at him for merely stepping over the hallway tape, only to now allow him into her bed. Sitting up on the edge of the mattress, he explained that as long as he could not comprehend her intentions, his deep sense of uneasiness would never dissipate. He noted with grim resignation that speaking his mind would inevitably cause her to burst into tears once more. Shadowing his expression, he admitted that keeping their distance was entirely justified, confessing that sharing the same space felt just as painful for him as it did for her. He went on to state that sleeping on the cold, hard hallway floor felt far more comfortable than staying in this bed, urging her to speak up if she had anything to say. Receiving only silent tears in response, he stood up, opened the bedroom door, and bade her a distant good night. Left alone under the soft glow of the nightstand lamp, she pulled the covers tight and wept in absolute solitude. Meanwhile, in another room, young Ichika tossed and turned restlessly, grumbling about how small and uncomfortably rigid her father's bed felt. Inspecting the makeshift sleeping area, the young girl realized it was not a real bed at all, but merely a row of plastic storage boxes covered by a thin mat. She reached down and pulled open one of the plastic storage containers resting beneath the thin mat. Inside, she uncovered a collection of small clothing, along with toys and picture books neatly tucked away from sight. Sifting further into the box, her eyes landed on a framed photograph taken during her entrance ceremony. Inspecting the photograph more closely, she noticed a sharp rip running down the surface right beside her father. Fixating on the tear, a subtle wave of suspicion and understanding began to form in her mind. Before she could dwell on it longer, a firm request echoed from outside the room, instructing her to turn off the lights and go to sleep. Quietly complying, she put the photograph back, lay down on her bedding, and reached out to click off the wall switch. As the room plunged into darkness, she closed her eyes, trying to force herself into slumber. Yet the memory of Sawako's advice returned to her thoughts, gently noting that adult matters might be too heavy for someone her age to overthink. Lying wide awake in the dark, her unblinking eyes remained open, weighed down by the silent mysteries surrounding her family. She stood alone by the bedroom window, staring out at the pale moon in the night sky, realizing that she was no longer a helpless child who could simply ignore the growing fractures in her family. Driven by this conviction, she turned her attention back to the picture frame, carefully turning it over in her hands as her wide eyes remained fixed on the torn photograph inside. Slipping the print neatly behind the taped backing of the frame, she sealed away the fragile remnant of her past, determined to uncover the truth behind her parents' secrets. He jolts awake with a sharp gasp, his eyes widening as a sudden realization strikes him. As he sits up groggily on his futon in the hallway, he tries to recall the night's strange events, remembering waking up in the dark before somehow ending up back where he started. Meanwhile, in the bedroom, Hikari clutches her blanket tightly around herself, overcome with guilt as she worries that she has brought him to tears once again. Back in the hallway, his heart pounds against his chest as he struggles to recall what he blurted out to her during the emotional turbulence of the previous night. Realizing he needs a distraction, he clutches his blanket and desperately tries to come up with a clever riddle on the spot. Elsewhere, in a quiet apartment kitchen, Mai Watanabe prepares her morning drink while checking a message that has just arrived on her smartphone. The message from Reitaro presents a daily puzzle, asking the recipient to determine whether a combination of symbols corresponds to an arrow or a bow using katakana. Puzzled by the prompt, she stares at her phone with a nervous sweat, admitting to herself that she has no idea how to solve it. She breaks down the clues step by step, analyzing how the geometric shapes must represent specific katakana characters that spell out one of the two choices. Reasoning through the phonetic options, she realizes that Japanese words like ya and yumi do not fit the grid, whereas loan words like arrow and bow fit perfectly when spelled out in katakana. She continued to ponder the logic behind the daily puzzle, questioning whether an answer consisting of merely 3 characters could truly be that straightforward. Meanwhile, further down the bridge, Reitaro walked calmly along the pedestrian path, his attention focused on the incoming notifications flickering across his phone screen. Scrolling through the online thread, he noted that several followers were actively guessing and debating the solution he had published earlier that morning. As he paused beside the railing, a voice called out his name, belonging to the young jogger who was making her way toward him along the walkway. Looking up from his device, he warmly acknowledged her greeting as she caught up with him. Smiling brightly despite being slightly winded from her run, she expressed her delight at bumping into the author of the riddles, confessing that she hadn't quite grasped how to solve today's puzzle. He admitted that today's riddle was far from his best work, while she explained that although she correctly picked option 1, she was still unsatisfied without understanding the underlying mechanics. Eager for a proper resolution, she gently asked if he would spare a small clue, emphasizing that reaching the correct answer by sheer guesswork ruined the enjoyment. He fell quiet for a moment, silently considering her request as he observed her eager expression. Refusing her plea with a calm demeanor, he explained that the original post already contained all necessary clues, offering a broader reflection that finding the path to an answer is often a deeper question than the riddle itself. His eyes bore a hollow, vacant expression as he admitted how deeply unsettling the entire feeling was. Noticing his somber demeanor, she pointed out that he was giving her that lifeless, dead-eyed gaze once again. Pressed by his cynicism, she questioned why he kept saying things that pushed people away, asking if something had happened to disrupt his usual composure. Lowering her gaze with a pained look, she confessed how difficult it was for her to see him in such distress. Flustered by her genuine concern, a faint blush crept onto his cheeks as he awkwardly stammered that he needed to leave for work immediately. She remained quiet, her brows furrowed with lingering concern as he prepared to step away. Pausing before he left, he offered a quiet proposal, asking if she could meet him at this very spot tonight so he could finally explain how to solve the riddle. Her eyes widened in surprise at his unexpected invitation and sudden change of heart. Meanwhile, sitting quietly in a spacious library surrounded by rows of bookshelves, Ichika wrestled with the riddle, analyzing how every option represented the number 1 using vertical and horizontal bars while trying to grasp their subtle differences. Clenching her teeth in sheer frustration, she refused to be satisfied with merely receiving the answer. She was determined to unravel the logic and master the puzzle herself. She was immersed in her studying when a familiar voice broke the library's quiet, as Reitaro arrived with 2 schoolmates enthusiastically calling out her name. Presenting his companions, he introduced them as members of the art club, Yui Yuki and Mai Watanabe, who greeted her with bright smiles after realizing they attended the same academy. Clearly bewildered by the sudden entourage, she turned an intense gaze toward him, questioning how he managed to know both of these girls. Encouraging a friendly atmosphere, the newcomers urged everyone to get along and politely asked for her name, prompting a quiet, hesitant response. Taking seats around her desk, he cheerfully declared that the 2 of them were riddle-solving partners, seeking her agreement as the girls listened intently. The visitors expressed genuine admiration, recalling a puzzle from before and praising how thoroughly entertaining it had been. Exited by their shared passion, ideas quickly escalated into creating a joint mystery-solving club, though their loud chatter drew an abrupt reprimand from the librarian. Having been promptly escorted out for causing a disturbance, the group found themselves standing together outside the library entrance. Continuing their brainstorming session on the sidewalk, one eagerly proposed a flamboyant club title involving art and detectives, drawing a skeptical remark from her peer. Observing their lively, foolish banter, a small snort escaped her as she tried, and failed, to conceal her amused smile. She assured them that being asked to leave the library was no problem at all, offering that stepping outside provided a welcome change of pace while pondering the difficult riddle. As they walked, one of the art club members stared down at the manga volume in her hands with a look of dismay, realizing she had accidentally grabbed volume 6 instead of 4. Facing light teasing over the mix-up, she frantically defended herself, insisting that the Roman numerals on the spine were far too confusing to read easily. Her defense sparked a broader discussion about numerical systems, with the others agreeing that Roman numerals became surprisingly tricky after 3 simple strokes. Hearing their debate, she turned to Hikari to ask for the official name of the standard digits they used every day, prompting him to clarify that they were called Arabic numerals. Armed with this realization, a quiet spark of understanding illuminated her features as she softly announced that she had figured out how to solve the riddle. Notebook in hand, her pen glided across the paper as she laid out the sequence of numbers alongside their corresponding tally marks and Roman equivalents. Impressed by the quick breakthrough, the art club member praised Hikari for his sharp mind, assuming his intellect came from being a recent transfer student. Pointing out his distinct uniform, she noted that he was the only one in the entire school wearing that older style, prompting him to tug nervously at his collar. Looking over at him, Ichika added a curious detail, revealing that the uniform wasn't even from his previous school, but from an era long before that. She stood side by side with the young boy, her intense, unblinking gaze locked forward as a sudden, heavy silence fell between them. Because of her blunt observation, their companion light-heartedly wondered if the boy's family was struggling financially, prompting an indignant protest from him that he was not that poor. Later that evening, back in her apartment, the young girl sat on the edge of her bed with her phone in hand, preparing to submit her final answer to the daily puzzle. With a quick tap of her thumb, she sent off her proposed solution, eager to see if her deductions were accurate. Across town, as he walked home along a busy street flanked by traffic, the counselor checked his messages and confirmed with a calm smile that her answer was correct. Reitaro rests his cheek against his hand, reflecting on how a person's true nature surfaces once they cease to act rationally. He gazes back at Hikari sitting on the edge of the bed, inwardly admitting to a cold-hearted detachment that unexpectedly surges within him. He stands alone on a bridge overlooking the dark cityscape, telling himself that having nowhere to sleep is entirely logical, yet feeling deeply unsettled. Meanwhile, back in the hallway, Hikari lingers near the doorway, her thoughts heavy with the memory of Kazumi asking to sleep beside her. Back on the street, Reitaro wrestles with these unsettling thoughts, recognizing how difficult it is to find clear answers when emotions cloud everything. He continues walking down the sidewalk in his formal suit, frustrated by his own actions and wondering why Kazumi made such a request. He imagines the empty twin beds back home, weighed down by the regret of sabotaging their chance to become a normal couple again. His gloom is interrupted when Sawako approaches him, noting the hollow, lifeless look in his eyes as she calls out his name. He falls silent on the overpass, illuminated only by the faint glow of a street lamp above. As she jogs nearby, he gazes toward her with a distant expression, wondering if she will truly come to his side. He recalled her pragmatic perspective, that learning to tune out trivial discomforts was simply a necessary survival skill in a fast-paced world, where caring too much served little purpose. Standing by the railing and gazing at his phone, he reasoned that while she might laugh off her own troubles as if they were nothing, seeing a genuine smile was all he truly needed right now. Meanwhile, miles away, the young student lay quietly on her bed, her gaze fixed entirely on her illuminated smartphone screen in the dark room. She had typed out her proposed solution to the morning's online riddle, identifying the hidden word pattern, which he promptly reviewed on his own device. Receiving her message, he confirmed that her answer was correct, explaining how the intersecting grid lines revealed the hidden clue as she read his response in bed. He went on to compliment her analytical skills, expressing sincere gratitude for tackling his challenge since no one else had managed to break down the puzzle so effectively, causing her to sit upright in surprise. A surge of immense pride washed over her, though her excitement quickly gave way to a sudden moment of quiet hesitation. Thinking back to her classmates and wondering if she could truly consider them friends, she began drafting a message to credit the classmate whose book had given her the crucial hint. She sent a candid follow-up explaining that she hadn't solved it entirely on her own, pointing out that a classmate's book cover with Roman numerals had unexpectedly provided the key to unlocking the answer. With the message delivered, she settled back onto her mattress with a gentle sense of contentment, reflecting softly to herself that the day had actually been quite pleasant. She jumps in surprise as her phone buzzes with a personal message from Reitaro, who reminds her to value her friends while she is young, leaving her stunned that he is addressing her directly. Meanwhile, standing beneath the warm glow of streetlights in the evening air, Reitaro gazes down at his device with a subtle, gentle expression. He quietly reflects on the unexpected connection, touched to discover that someone out there genuinely understood the intention behind his riddle. As he waits patiently by the railing outside, she carefully crafts her response from the comfort of her bed, taking her time to find the right words. Opening up about her struggles, she confides in him that despite being a high school student, she lacks close bonds and finds social interactions daunting, questioning how to express gratitude when she feels so distant from others. In response to her raw honesty, he prompts her to dig deeper, gently asking what specific challenges she encounters when trying to communicate. Struggling to put her internal world into language, she clarifies that while she knows what she wants to convey, the actual words escape her when she tries to say them. His gentle reply reassures her that gratitude isn't restricted to speech alone. Thoughtful actions can carry just as much meaning, reassuring her that she will be all right. He goes on to offer wise counsel, explaining that the true challenge isn't merely speaking, but choosing how to communicate thoughtfully, commending her effort to find words that protect others from harm. Taking in his deeply empathetic perspective, she lies in quiet wonder, staring at her screen as a serene comfort settles over her room. As she finishes reading the latest message from Reitaro, his polite apology and invitation to his next riddle leave a warm impression. Sitting alone in her bedroom, she ponders why this online persona strangely reminds her of her own father. Looking thoughtfully into the distance, she secretly wishes that she and her father could communicate with such ease and open honesty. Elsewhere, late at night, a young boy questions his mother as she prepares to step out the front door. She casually explains that she is merely heading out to pick up breakfast supplies, but her son instantly volunteers to go in her stead. While she tries to dismiss his concern, he firmly reminds her of the time she was stalked late at night and had to call Ichika's father for help. He continues to press her, finding it absurd that someone who was forced to move house due to a stalker would now act so careless. Widening his eyes in suspicion, he asks if the entire stalker threat was nothing more than an elaborate excuse. Hurt by his accusation, she asks if he truly doubts his own mother, to which he quietly confesses that he just wants to avoid transferring schools yet again. Relieved to understand his underlying anxiety, she promises him that he won't have to change schools again, putting his fears to rest. She listened as her son offered to run out to grab bread and milk, asking for her wallet before heading outside. Inside another residence, Sayako reflected on how sharp-witted Hikaru was, wondering if he had realized what she was doing. With a heavy heart, she looked down at her phone to compose a text message. Walking down the street at night, Reitaro checked his phone and saw her message canceling their plan to meet. She read his kind reply telling her not to worry, which only stirred her emotions further. As Reitaro continued on his way home alone, she stared lingeringly at her screen, wishing she could be with him. Her cheeks flushed with warmth as she clutched the phone tight, silently desiring his company. A short while later, Reitaro stepped into the entryway of his house and called out a tentative greeting. Hikari waited in the hallway, greeting him with a soft and comforting welcome. Because of her next words regarding a conversation with one of his school teachers, Reitaro froze in surprise. He listened intently as Hikari suggested pretending to be a normal family for Ichika's sake, even if only on the surface. The shock deepened when Ichika revealed she had scheduled a group session with a school counselor for the following day. A heavy silence fell, casting a shadow over the hidden tension and distance remaining between them. Memories resurfaced of past days when they stood side by side, wrapped together in a thick scarf against the cold. Reitaro stood in the corridor as Hikari confirmed her plans for the upcoming school counseling session, promising to adjust her work schedule so she could attend. He paused, digging through his memories to recall the identity of Ichika's homeroom teacher, wondering if the man's name had been Mr. Agino. She confirmed his suspicion, recalling how that very teacher had advised her that helping Ichika return to normal required their entire household to function as a normal family first. Hearing this rationale, he urged her to stop sleeping in the hallway and return to her proper room. Meanwhile, in her room, Ichika sat in silence while holding her phone, quietly absorbing her mother's request for her to rest properly in her bed. She narrowed her eyes in suspicion, sensing that something was fundamentally wrong with the explanation she had been given. Driven by these doubts, she sought out answers regarding the exact timeline of events involving her family and the school. Gathering with her classmates at the municipal library, she pressed them to pinpoint when her mother had actually spoken with Mr. Agino at the school. One of her friends blurted out an outburst of excitement, prompting a quick warning from another to keep his voice down before they were kicked out. He then recalled seeing the conversation in the hallway on the day he received a riddle near the art room. As the group continued piecing the clues together, her friends asked why her father was currently sleeping in the hallway, leaving her struggling to explain the strange living arrangement. She explained to her gathered peers that after taking over her father's room, he was left with no choice but to sleep outside in the hallway. One of her classmates immediately questioned this logic, asking why he could not simply return to his previous sleeping quarters if that were truly the case. The arrangement made little practical sense, as returning to his original bed would mean sleeping beside her mother, something her mother had explicitly agreed to. yet he was still found in the hallway every morning. Whispering among themselves, her friends pondered whether a middle-of-the-night quarrel had driven him out, though they noted that since her mother had invited him in the first place, their relationship could not be entirely strained. She pushed past their speculation, pointing out the core contradiction in the timeline. While she originally believed her mother acted solely on the counselor's advice, the sequence of events simply did not align with that theory. With a sharp, unwavering stare, she made her intention clear to everyone present. She was determined to verify every single detail until the truth was laid bare. To lay out the facts clearly, she slid her handwritten notebook across the table, inviting her companions to examine the documented timeline for themselves. The written log recorded Monday night as the start of the room swap, followed by Tuesday morning when her father was found sleeping in the hall, hours before her mother ever consulted the counselor at school that afternoon. Her classmates leaned in close, their eyes wide as they absorbed the subtle, yet crucial discrepancies mapped out on the page. Seated before them with the notes resting in her lap, she pointed out that her mother had instructed her father to sleep in her room before anyone had spotted her with the counselor, proving the decision came first. Staring down at the chronological proof, the inevitable conclusion began to dawn on all of them. She firmly concluded that her mother had acted out of a genuine desire to be kind to her father, rather than following external advice. Hearing this revelation, her friends listened intently, attempting to make sense of her mother's true motivations. The girls quickly offered a comforting interpretation, suggesting that her mother simply felt sorry seeing her husband sleep in the hallway and wished to reconcile. Deeply moved, one of them took her hands and earnestly voiced her hope that her parents would resolve their troubles as soon as possible. As the conversation wrapped up, her attention shifted to her brother, who stood nearby in somber silence. Stepping away from the group outside, she offered a quiet apology as they parted ways with her classmates. In response, he reassured her that she was not to blame, even as she silently worried about how deeply these troubles were weighing on him. Walking together, he encouraged her to tell her father everything and trust her own intuition regarding Mr. Ajino, cautioning her against taking the counselor's words at face value. Soon after, they arrived at the school where Mr. Shinohara stood waiting, expressing his gratitude for their willingness to participate. Guiding them through the quiet corridors, the elder neighbor led the group toward the faculty room, preparing to present their findings to the school counselor. As he guided the family to the doorway, a voice called out for Miss Maki, the school counselor, who answered right away, while Ichika stood silently nearby, unable to bring herself to speak. Explaining that he would wait in the staff room for now, the elder departed as Miss Maki invited the family inside, noting that Mr. Ajino would not be joining them. Once inside the room, everyone took their places around the table, with the young student seated next to her mother while her father sat across from them beside the counselor. Handing out several document sheets, Miss Maki requested that both parents fill out detailed mark sheets concerning their knowledge of the family's situation, warning that the extensive questions would take considerable time. As her husband hesitantly accepted the task, the counselor suggested taking Ichika into an adjacent room so the adults could focus on the questionnaires without distraction. Leaving the couple alone at the table, Miss Maki quietly ushered the young girl out of the room. Looking at the heavy stack of forms, her husband suggested dividing the papers between them to speed up the process. He added dismissively that she likely knew nothing about their daughter anyway, but she firmly declined, insisting that she would complete every single page herself. With no further debate, the pair sat quietly in the spacious room as she began steadily filling out the evaluation forms. Watching her dark pencil mark each box without a second thought, he felt a quiet confirmation of his long-standing suspicions. He watched her fill out the forms, acutely aware of her internal belief that this whole assessment was entirely meaningless. Flashbacks of Ichika's quiet demeanor at school passed through Hikari's mind, recalling how rumors circulated about her daughter being distant, though Hikari saw it simply as the same deep introversion she herself had suffered as a child. Returning to the present, she explained to Kazumi how she used to struggle with reading the room and reading people's expressions, finding conversations so embarrassing that isolating herself felt like the only relief. She confessed that her chest physically ached whenever she envisioned Ichika sitting alone in an empty classroom, quietly reading by herself. Pain clouded her eyes as she voiced her terrifying dread that Ichika would never be able to survive independently in the real world when she grew up. Tears finally overflowed as she articulated the source of her heartbreak, admitting that it terrified her because Ichika was identical to her. Overwhelmed by the flood of memories and fear, her lips trembled as her voice broke entirely. Observing her distress, Kazumi looked at her with a gentle, grounded gaze before softly speaking her name. Sitting beside her in the quiet room, he reminded her that while she and Ichika were mother and daughter, they were still two completely different individuals. At his reassuring words, she buried her face in her hands and broke down sobbing. Just as the counselor slid the door open to check on their questionnaire progress, she stood quietly beside her daughter as Kazumi politely announced to the counselor that they would be taking their leave. As the family gathered their belongings to step out, Ajino expressed his gratitude for their time and offered to provide additional information on support classes whenever they needed it. Walking down the quiet hallway, she bowed her head in polite farewell as they passed a young teacher waiting in the corridor. Noticing the heavy mood and her tear-stained eyes, the teacher voiced his concern to Ajino, asking if something troubling had occurred during the session. Outside in the school courtyard, as the family made their way toward the exit, the concerned educator hurried down the path behind them. Catching up to them near the perimeter fence, he called out to Kazumi directly to halt his steps. Turning around to address him, Kazumi listened as the teacher requested a brief, private moment to talk. Sensing the tension, she suggested taking Ichika home ahead of time so the two men could speak without interruption. Once they were alone, the teacher confronted Kazumi directly, demanding to know why he had made his wife cry and asking if living such a life was truly manageable for him. Walking home with a classmate after school, Ichika suddenly pauses, remembering a book she needs. She turns back to inform her friend that she will be heading to the library, telling her to go home without her. She then hurries back toward the school grounds alone. Entering the building near the shoe lockers, she freezes as she spots her father speaking with Mr. Ajino in the hallway. She remembers her brother Hikaru's past words, reflecting on how their mother's distress seemed to worsen around the time she began meeting with Ajino. She stays hidden behind the wall to overhear their conversation as Ajino confronts her father about why he brings his wife to tears. He presses her father further, asking if the situation at home is even worse than it appears. He continues relentlessly, demanding to know if her father is truly that tactless or if his behavior behind closed doors is even more severe. He then suggests that bringing these hidden issues into the open could finally allow others to intervene and offer help. In response, her father turns to face him with an unreadable expression, calmly apologizing for making the counselor get so deeply invested in their family's matters. He stood with an unreadable expression, forcing the counselor to observe how strikingly similar father and daughter appeared, unable to fathom what lay beneath his calm facade. Standing together in the quiet school hallway, the counselor pointed out that any household where a father's actions drive a mother to tears is fundamentally broken, a point the father quietly acknowledged. The counselor pressed further, explaining that mental suffering can be just as damaging as physical abuse, urging him to at least recognize the subtle harm taking place under his own roof. With a reassuring smile, the counselor offered a ray of hope, insisting that open and gentle communication between both spouses would inevitably resolve their troubles. He advised the father to prioritize his daughter above everything else, promising that prioritizing her well-being would naturally mend his relationship with his wife and prevent further sorrow, all while the young girl listened silently nearby. As the father calmly agreed with the counselor's logical advice, the daughter stood hidden nearby, her emotions swirling as she absorbed every word of their conversation. Frustration mounted within her as she criticized her father's passive compliance, wondering why he refused to defend himself when his own emotional stability was secretly crumbling at home. Watching him maintain his quiet composure, she scoffed at the idea of him merely playing the part of a good father, knowing firsthand how deeply sincere he truly was. She realized that while an outsider would easily blame her father for her mother's tears, his harsh words had merely been the catalyst that sparked a far deeper, pre-existing crisis. She understood that her father's habitual calm and carefully measured words stemmed from knowing the sharp pain language could inflict, whereas her mother desperately yearned to reach out to him, but simply didn't know how. While she made her way back home, Ichika stood alone in the hallway, frustration welling up inside her at how unfair everything felt. Down the corridor, Mr. Ajino reassured Kazumi that taking even small steps forward was worthwhile, while Kazumi quietly apologized for all the trouble caused during their meeting. With their discussion concluded, the counselor gathered his things and departed, leaving father and daughter standing together in the quiet school hallway. Noticing her presence, he expressed surprise, having assumed she had already headed home with her mother, but she remained silent, glaring at him with heavy resentment. As he thoughtfully pondered the situation, she sharply pointed out that Mr. Ajino now held the impression that he was a terrible father. She demanded to know why he hadn't defended himself or countered the teacher's remarks, asking if it truly didn't bother him to hear outsiders speak about their family that way. Staring him down with intense emotion, she pressed further, unable to comprehend how he could remain so detached and composed in a moment like this. He quietly shook his head and insisted that her assumption was entirely incorrect, refusing to lose his composure. He explained that since the counselor was her teacher, maintaining a conflict-free relationship was paramount, though she inwardly marveled at his cold pragmatism, wondering if he even possessed human warmth. Glancing away, he quietly pondered to himself what the teacher could possibly truly understand about his life and struggles. He reflected that labels like a bad father were simply fabrications made up by the counselor, carrying no real weight against who he actually was. Recalling his words, Ichika remembered how he had calmly explained that because the accusations were directed at a false image, his dignity remained entirely untouched. The weight of that revelation settled over her, leaving her speechless as she began to see her father's quiet composure in a whole new light. Shortly afterward, Mr. Ajino instructed her to head home on her own, mentioning that he had another location to visit before turning to walk away. She made her way directly to the community building where her peers were gathered. Inside, several students were chatting casually about counseling and how Ichika was coping, unaware that she was arriving right behind them. Catching her breath, the girl caught up with her friends and turned directly to Hikaru, admitting that she finally understood what he had been trying to tell her about Mr. Ajino all along. She went on to explain how the counselor formed rigid, arbitrary impressions of people and spoke to them entirely based on those preconceived notions, just as he had done with Hikaru before. He had unfairly framed Hikaru as a perpetually troublesome transfer student who simply could not fit into the school environment. As Hikaru listened attentively, Ichika realized that her mother had fallen for those same fabricated narratives, wrongly believing that their friendship would bring nothing but trouble. She declares firmly that regardless of what others might think, she will always remain friends with Hikaru. Her declaration brings a light-hearted laugh from Hikaru, who warmly thanks her as they gather around the table. As they continue chatting, the conversation turns lively, discussing how people judge based on visual impressions and teasing Hikaru about his expression, while lightheartedly debating who looks like an honor student. Surrounded by her peers, warm laughter fills the air as they enjoy each other's easy companionship. Watching from outside through the window, Kazumi takes in the cheerful atmosphere and realizes his daughter is perfectly fine surrounded by her friends. Turning away, a quiet feeling of relief settles over him as he leaves them to their conversation. Walking down the quiet street, he encounters Hikari approaching from the opposite direction. Surprised to run into him, she explains that she swung by after hearing Ichika was heading to the library, curious to see how things were. Falling into step beside her, he walks along the pathway in thoughtful silence. Reassuring her with a gentle look, he remarks softly that their daughter appears to be having fun with her friends. He listened quietly as she offered a soft apology, looking down with a slight blush. In response, he confessed his earnest desire to be a good husband and father, admitting that he often wrestled with how best to express his feelings. She took in his honest words, reflecting on how what truly mattered was ensuring the people he cared for understood his genuine intentions. After sharing that moment of quiet understanding, they stood side by side outside the school building as the light softly filtered down. Soon after, the exit doors swung open, and a small group of students walked out into the courtyard alongside their acquaintance. Flustered by his mother's sudden appearance, the young boy vented his embarrassment while his classmates marveled at her presence, prompting an unexpected exchange between the families. Unbothered by his outburst, She explained that she had merely stopped by to pick up his new uniform order. Watching the familiar adults conversing peacefully, the young girl quietly noted how everything seemed to be working out after all. Turning back toward them with a warm composure, he suggested that they all walk back home together. Outside the school gates, final instructions were given to Ichika, reminding her that if her body began to hurt, she could visit the nurse's office or seek permission to head home early. Just before turning to enter, she had been greeted warmly by Sayako, who took the opportunity to pass along a forgotten white coat for Hikaru's lunch duty. Wishing them both a good day, the young girl turned on her heel and cheerfully made her way toward the school building. As she walked away, the counselor and his companion watched her go, relieved that she had finally found the resolve to return to her studies. However, the woman hesitated, her tone shifting as she prepared to offer a long-overdue apology. She confessed that her previous assumptions about domestic violence in his household were likely mistaken, acknowledging that as an outsider who knew so little, she had spoken without thinking, mistaking ordinary marital spats for something far more sinister. Walking side by side near the schoolyard, she admitted that a lingering feeling of envy had clouded her judgment when she saw the family walking home together from the library. Looking back on that moment, she recalled how genuinely happy and complete they had appeared to her. She reasoned that a devoted, gentle wife could never commit acts of violence, leading her to realize that her suspicions had been completely unfounded. Listening quietly, he thanked her for her concern and apologized for causing such anxiety, though his expression remained heavy as he began to explain the delicate situation surrounding his spouse. He revealed that while his wife cared deeply and bore immense pressure to support their child during difficult times, her overwhelming emotions sometimes manifested in chaotic outbursts, leaving behind shattered remains and making it his duty to hold everything together. He explained with a heavy gaze how Kazumi had thrown a glass at whatever she saw in her fit of distress. Continuing his explanation, he added that he merely happened to be standing directly in front of her when it happened. Listening closely, she stared back in stunned disbelief at his casual phrasing. Standing together near the outdoor railing, she questioned him in disbelief, asking if he was truly serious about what had occurred. Deep down, she found herself doubting his story, reasoning that no one would casually throw a glass at someone purely by accident. He remained quiet, his downcast eyes filled with a tired, distant gravity. Meanwhile, inside the quiet school stairwell, a teacher called out from above, asking Karashiki if he knew where Shinoya had gone. Turning back as he walked down, the boy casually claimed to have no idea, unaware that she was sitting on the steps just below them. Descending the stairs, the teacher quickly spotted her huddled silently on the steps and noted her presence. Approaching her gently, he explained that he was simply concerned after failing to find her in the classroom or nurse's office, reminding her that there were adults who genuinely cared about her well-being while the young boy watched silently. She watched as Hikaru boldly confronted Mr. Ajino, warning the teacher that refusing to trust his students and spreading falsehoods would ultimately destroy his own credibility. Unfazed by the boy's blunt warning, the teacher merely hummed in thought before turning on his heel and walking away down the quiet corridor. Once they were alone, she suddenly lowered her head and buried her face in her arms, prompting a flustered Hikaru to ask if her stomach was hurting again. Looking up at him with a hollow gaze, she confessed her wish that her own father could be brave enough to stand up to Mr. Ajino in the same way. She went on to admit that she too had frozen up, hiding uselessly behind the shoe boxes without uttering a single word, prompting Hikaru to inquire if something had occurred after her counseling session. She explained that while she desperately wanted to challenge Mr. Ajino's claims, she lacked any concrete proof to support her suspicions. Sitting together on the stairwell steps, she shared her lingering doubts about whether her father truly operated the social media account under the name Reitaro, noting how carefully her father usually chose his words. Determined to get to the truth, she unzipped her school bag and announced that she had brought something crucial with her today. She pulled out a wooden picture frame and handed it to her companion, who examined the object closely. As Hikaru inspected the back, his eyes widened in surprise upon noticing hidden photographs concealed inside the backing. Just as she revealed, she had discovered it hidden in her father's room. He examined the torn photograph hidden inside the frame, astonished by what lay before him. while Ichika insisted this fragment was absolute proof that her father truly loved their family, directly refuting everything Mr. Agino had claimed. Turning his gaze toward her, he watched silently as she carefully smoothed out the jagged edges of the torn picture. Sitting alongside her on the stairwell, he found himself bewildered by her optimism, wondering how she could draw such a hopeful conclusion from a damaged keepsake. Shock filled his eyes as dark thoughts raced through his mind, pondering what kind of anguish led to a commemorative photo being ripped apart and whether any genuine hope remained for her household. Meanwhile, she stared ahead with quiet determination, unfazed by the doubts surrounding her. Standing up resolutely, she announced that she would take the photo directly to Mr. Agino and lay out her true thoughts, refusing to remain passive any longer. Following her lead into the quiet hallway, the pair set off together to search for the counselor. While he silently agonized over whether presenting a torn photograph would actually convince Mr. Agino, she gained renewed strength from his presence, confident that she finally had the courage to speak up. Spotting the counselor further down the corridor, she immediately called out to Mr. Agino, stopping him in his tracks. Confronting him directly in the hallway, she held out the torn picture and explained that she had overheard his earlier discussion behind the shoe lockers, firmly declaring that he had completely misunderstood her father's true feelings. She stood quietly before Mr. Agino as he took the item from her hands to inspect it. Instead of taking the proof seriously, the counselor offered a patronizing look, offering pity and diagnosing her distress as a sign that her judgment had been clouded by traumatic treatment. Returning the picture back into her hands, he thanked her for sharing it, while concluding that her psychological condition was far more severe than he had originally presumed. Unable to stand by and watch her be dismissed, Hikaru stepped forward in frustration, demanding that the teacher give the evidence a proper look. He pressed the argument further, pointing out the logical flaw in the counselor's assumptions. No one would bother carefully keeping and repairing a ripped photo unless it held deep significance. Listening closely, she knew in her heart that the reality of finding the mended photograph hidden in her father's room was an undeniable truth that could not be brushed away. With heightened emotion, Hikaru declared to the hallway that her father clearly still possessed a genuine desire to mend their broken family. He turned back toward her with a confident nod, seeking her agreement to reinforce their shared belief against the stubborn adult. However, Mr. Agino merely paused and stroked his chin, calmly asserting that the pair were simply ignoring objective reality in favor of believing whatever suited them. As they walked outside the school grounds, a heavy wave of defeat washed over Hikaru, dismayed by how completely the teacher had refused to listen despite their earnest sincerity. He turned to Ichika and asked if she felt any anger after their encounter, but she calmly dismissed the counselor's harsh evaluation, reasoning that the man truly knew nothing about her. As they walked together down the quiet street, he expressed his admiration for her composure, marveling at how unfazed she was. She explained that the counselor's claims of her being a helpless child were entirely fabricated in his own mind, so she saw no reason to be bothered by words that did not reflect who she truly was.